listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, fixated between the ever-expanding rift on our collective ideology. I'm your political analyst fighting for the right, Austin Pelly.
And in the left corner, I'm your indefatigable, your ever-vigilant, your burning ember and the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And that means that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. Good morning all. Good morning, Jamarl.
What's going on, my man? Doing all right?
So you have your soapbox segment.
Yes.
So I'm going to step on my soapbox for like half a minute here.
Go for it. Take
and
the whole minute. Take the whole minute.
I know that people didn't come here to hear my gripes in the gym.
Yes, they did.
But they're going to. If you are working out and you find yourself dancing more in the mirror and looking at yourself than actually working out, please just don't go. Or at the very least, don't go at peak hours of like between 5 and 6, which is like the peak hours because people are coming back from work and they're like, oh, let me just get in a quick hour workout.
Right.
Especially if you're in a small gym that's attached to the apartment building and you're taking up a bench, one of the two benches. If you're sitting there, you're Snapchatting people, you're like lifting a couple weights for like 3 minutes and then dancing for 10 minutes in the mirror and your stuff's still sitting on the bench. The entire time I was there for an hour, they didn't stand up once. I mean, they stood up, but like they didn't move from the bench. There's two benches and there's 15 people in the gym because it's an apartment building one. That's the one I go to. It's an apartment building one and they don't have a lot of equipment, but they have enough. And you can't beat the convenience of it being attached to your building. There's 15 people and this like 400, 500 square foot area with two benches, some free weights and some bikes and all that. And you're sitting on a bench watching yourself dance in the mirror. I understand if you like finish a set and you're like pumped and you like do a quick little move or something because you know you got your music playing. But when you're dancing more than working out, no.
So you guys
that ruined my day yesterday.
So you basically watch somebody work out, dance, and just love themselves.
I'm not saying not like the Zumba workouts, which are kind of dancing. Thank you, Andre, for pointing that out. I mean like looking in the mirror and giving yourself like the finger guns and giving the just
it's like they wanted to touch themselves inappropriately with everybody there at the weight room. It's like, oh God, I'm so hot. Let me touch my body.
It ruined my day yesterday. Because I went there, like I did a whole scoop of pre-workout and everything, and so I've got like 400 milligrams of caffeine pumping through my veins that I'm ready to expend, and just waiting for a chance to get on this bench. For an hour, they're just sitting there, and I just lost my mind. I just had to leave. I was done. I was like, well, okay, you just ruined a nice chest day.
Wow. Sorry to hear that, man.
So that's my rant for the day. I'm sorry for everyone who didn't want to hear it, but you did anyway. So now, let's go into headlines.
It's like you had to clear the queue.
Yeah. I had to get it off my chest because, I didn't get to do chest yesterday. Yeah. Like that segue skills. In headlines, in COVID news, yesterday in the United States, there were 456,871 new COVID cases reported, along with 2,558 deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 469,931 cases per day, a decrease of 42% from the average 2 weeks ago. 64% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated and 75% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 74,989,453 people across the United States and killed 885,938 people. We're at that 40th plus percentile of decrease, and that is just going up and up. The right direction. The right direction. In national news, strict precautions to keep President Joe Biden protected from the coronavirus could threaten to undercut his administration's efforts to tell Americans, especially those vaccinated and boosted, like the president, that they can get on with something closer to normal in the face of Omicron. When Biden met with U.S. governors at the White House on Monday, he was the only one given a glass of water, lest anyone else remove their mask to take a drink. The president was seated more than 10 feet from everyone, including Vice President Kamala Harris and members of his cabinet. A White House staffer who was wearing a surgical mask when Biden entered the room was quickly handed an N95 version. Wow, these are just some of the extraordinary efforts on the part of the White House to keep the president from getting COVID-19, an effort that started before the now 79-year-old was even elected by focusing on remote events from a studio in the basement of his Delaware home. That's awesome. Good find, Jack. I'm just thinking, like, you know how in science class in high school you had the squirt bottles of water?
Yeah.
Why don't they just give them all those? You know, just you can get it under the mask and just
Or straw. Just put the straw.
Oh yeah, well, I guess a straw
Or
would work
straw.
just as good.
I mean, unless something's wrong with his, what is it? That suck faculty, whatever that thing is. Sometimes it happens when you get older, you lose the ability to kind of.
Hey, Biden wasn't put in office for his suck faculty.
No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. In fact, in lieu of that,
Raunchy show this morning. Moving on, kicking off Black History Month, at least half a dozen historically black colleges and universities fielded bomb threats yesterday across 5 states and, of course, D.C. After issuing a shelter in place and a sweep of the campuses, no explosive devices were found at any school. The threats came yesterday, the day before Black History Month, and are riding on the back of a series of threats to the same and other black campuses on January 4th. The college's FBI and ATF will continue to investigate and monitor the situation. U.S. regulators are urging drug maker Pfizer to apply for emergency authorization for a 2-dose regimen of its COVID-19 vaccines for children 6 months to 5 years old, while awaiting data on a 3-dose course. Aiming to clear the way for the shots as soon as late February, a person familiar with the matter told the Associated Press Monday. Now, the Food and Drug Administration is pushing the company to submit its application based on the 2-dose data for potential approval in February, and then to return for additional authorization once it has the data from the 3rd-dose study, which is expected in March. The person familiar with the matter said the 2-step authorization process could mean that young children could be vaccinated more than a month earlier than previously estimated, assuming the FDA and the Center for Disease Control Prevention greenlights the shots. The U.S. federal prison system is currently on lockdown after a gang altercation took place early Monday. 2 inmates were killed during the fight, and another 2 were injured at a penitentiary in Texas. The incident happened at around 11:30 a.m. yesterday at USP Beaumont. The altercation involved members of the MS-13 street gang. In international news, the United States and Russia bitterly attacked each other over the Ukraine crisis in a diplomatic brawl Monday at the UN Security Council. In a session replete with acidic exchanges that could have been lifted from the Cold War era. Strong words there. The Americans, backed by their Western allies, accused Russia of endangering peace and destabilizing global security by massing more than 100,000 troops on Ukraine's border, while Kremlin diplomats dismissed what they called baseless and hysterical U.S. fear-mongering aimed at weakening Russia and provoking armed conflict. The meeting of the 15 Nation Security Council requested by the United States last week has not been expected to produce any diplomatic breakthroughs. I think they're both right and they're both wrong.
Yeah.
Does Russia have the... Actually, I shouldn't go at this right now.
We can go back to it.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson apologized and vowed to fix it after a report on Monday into lockdown parties held at his Downing Street residence criticized serious failures at the heart of government. A limited report by senior civil servant Sue Gray on Monday found that alcohol-fueled events had taken place at Downing Street when lockdown rules were enforced. Gray said that there had been serious failure of leadership and that some of the events should not have been permitted. After initially saying that no rules were broken, Johnson has repeatedly declined to answer specifics about his own attendance at some of the gatherings. Opinion polls show British voters felt Johnson should resign, 69% in Savannah CompsRes poll and 63% in YouGov survey. And in holiday news, today is National Baked Alaska Day, Spunky Old Broads Day, and in Rwanda, it's National Heroes Day. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. See, Jack messaged me before the show. Mm-hmm. He goes, just so you know, there's one of these holidays today that I put a little comment so that way you know what it is.
Yeah.
And I'm a little offended now because, Jack, you don't think I know what a spunky old broad is? He says the special holiday created by Dr. Gail Carson in 2002 aims to dispel the myth about life automatically winding up for women once they hit the 50 mark. Mm-hmm. Need proof trailblazing Kamala Harris, who at 56 shattered racial barriers by becoming the 49th president of the United States. I think he took that from a site. That's not his words. So don't come at him. And so forth. Jack, I know plenty of spunky old broad. So I'm going to put that out there, okay? Anyway, What I was saying with Russia and the U.S.
Also knows plenty of spunky broads, right?
Spunky old broads.
Spunky old broads.
Yes.
Not just broads.
They're my favorite type of. I can't. I feel
Favorite type
bad
of broad.
saying. Is it bad to say broad referring to a woman? I remember
think
being
because-
corrected at one point when I was like 10 or 12, and it was like, oh, chicks.
Yeah.
If you say chicks, it's like that's just kind of demeaning.
Yeah.
And I was told like, huh.
Is chicks demeaning? Maybe, I guess. Is broad demeaning? For some reason, chicks feels worse than broad. I don't know. Broad doesn't feel as a negative to me or pejorative. But I don't know. I guess
Give your answers to us in the chat.
Yeah.
Reach out to us. We would love to hear what the general consensus is of our listeners. Is broads are broads more offensive than chicks?
Yes. Yes.
And
Big story
are
of the
they
day.
both offensive? Yeah. Let's change the headline right now, guys. Anyway, U.S. and Russia. I know we've said it a bunch. I think Russia is free to move troops along their border. I
Or
think
in
that-
their own country.
Right.
Yeah.
In their own
It's like-
country.
Yeah.
I think that Putin's probably a little bit like, hey, remember the USSR? Remember when NATO was formed to combat the USSR? Remember how the USSR is dissolved now and you still have this major
Yes.
world force?
Exactly, right.
Oh, wait a second. There is no coalition that's at the level of NATO and you're trying to keep expanding it. I understand why he's wary about that.
Yeah.
Especially because NATO tends to be a little sock puppet for the U.S.
Pretty much, yeah.
I get it. I get why he's upset about it.
Not to mention that we're on their borders, of all places. I mean, like, we are on their border. I mean, we've been doing these kind of military exercises and stuff like that. And even this notion where they're like, they shouldn't have to do this or they shouldn't have to do that. We've expanded NATO to the point where we're basically at their borders, and there's even talk about potentially gobbling up like Finland, Georgia. And, it's from their standpoint, that doesn't necessarily look like a peaceful organization. It looks like an organization that is trying to get more and more political clout.
And also, Russia, you hit it on the nose, criticizing American media for inflating the problem and causing mass hysteria.
Yes.
And fear-mongering. Duh.
Yeah.
We had the Ukrainian president
Right.
literally tell America,
Cut it out.
relax.
Yeah, cut it out.
Chill out.
Yeah. You're
Like-
freaking people out, man.
We're the ones who, if it's war, we're the ones who are going to die.
Yeah.
And we're not as scared as you're saying we are and as the state side is. You're just causing mass hysteria. And you know what? When you have an armed firearm, a loaded firearm, which I've been saying is Donbass, when you have a loaded firearm and you increase mass hysteria, that gun is way more likely to go off.
Yes, it is.
And if that goes off, if the U.S. thinks or sees, or even if the media starts to portray it, that Russia's invaded, shot fired, we're going to go.
Oh, hell
We're going to go
breaks
Swiss.
loose. Yeah, big time. I mean,
We're
all of that,
going to bring as much of NATO as will come. Germany might back out.
there's going to be a few countries. I mean, Germany, Hungary, France is having conversations with Russia, apparently, and those conversations apparently have been going relatively well. They're supposed to be having additional conversations. Lavrov is supposed to be having a conversation with Blinken today, again, and that's, again, after the UN Security Council. Yeah, to your point, that is probably one of the most dangerous parts of the world right now. Because if there's a misprediction between the two countries, Russia has already said, look, if it's up to us, we're not going in. By the same token, it is not entirely up to us. It kind of depends on what you guys do and if you're going to continuously go after or ignore our security concerns. And why are they wrong in asking to pay attention to our security concerns? I mean, again, I keep pointing out the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is just that in reverse. As opposed to missiles being at Cuba aimed at the United States, you basically have an organization that was set up in order to combat the Soviet Union or remnants of the Soviet Union, in this case, Russia, gobbling up many of those old Soviet republics to basically have a fait accompli in case that there's any kind of, let's say, military provocation. So if you're sitting in that situation and you're looking out and you're seeing they're trying to surround me, they're trying to get those hostile elements closer and closer to my border. If anything pops off, they want to be able to automatically have a win just by their dominance of position. Can't allow that. This is no different than any kind of chess stuff. It's like, am I really going to wait till my opponent gets in the perfect position where I can't do anything from the standpoint of negotiation because it's already a win?
I've been asked a few times, like, because I'm more right wing.
Yeah.
I've been asked a few times, like, hey, what's your opinion on the Ukraine situation? And to which I think I'm relatively patriotic to my country.
Yeah.
I still think we mess up a lot.
Yeah.
And we think we're way better than we are.
And by the way, those aren't in conflict.
Right.
I mean, that's just a person, right?
Right. So I was like talking with one of my friends at one point about this, and it's weird. Like as soon as you enter the news space, all anyone wants to talk about is the news. It gets exhausting.
Yeah, right.
It's exhausting. But at one point he was like, and he's probably more like hoorah America. And at one point he goes, wait a second. What if Mexico put all these troops right next to the U.S.? I was like, what do you think we would do?
Right.
Really?
Right.
And he's like, oh, I get it now, why Russia is reacting like that.
That's the way you have to explain it. Because otherwise they don't get it. Like, because oftentimes they'd be like, well, I mean, Russia is at their border. It's like, are they really at the border? I mean, it's like 200 kilometers away. Oh, really? Is that far? Yes, it's really that far.
I still stand by that is the border. Because that means that they could mobilize within 2-3 hours and enter Ukraine. I say that's pretty close. I guess
the question is, what is the posture? Are they in an offensive or defensive posture?
So far, exactly where I was going now. So far as we've seen, they're in defensive, which means that they can't mobilize that fast.
Right.
But if that were to change to offensive, they could invade Ukraine within 3 hours.
Yes.
As of right now, that can't happen. Right. So, but you know what? You wouldn't get that feeling if you were listening to American media.
No, you wouldn't. I mean, it is also weird that you have the United States so insistent, imminent invasion, et cetera, and Ukraine is like, hey, calm down. We're the country that you're talking about. Like, how weird is that? The United States is basically saying, we're willing to end the world over the Ukraine. Ukraine's like, whoa, calm down. We're this is us. This is to be fought here. Mm-hmm. We're not on board for that. We need to bring down the hysteria. And the U.S. is like, hey, you're supposed to be, we're doing this for you. What are you doing? How are you undercutting our story in this particular situation? And it's like, and they are undercutting the U.S. story. It's like, calm down. It's like, how is the country who's the object of all this trying to tell a country that is not there, calm down, pipe down. You guys are, too animated. You're screwing with our economy. You're freaking our people out. I need you to calm down. They even go further. And in fact, let's do this. Let's take a break because I have the clip.
Yes, I want to get to that. But we have some results in about our question.
Oh, go for it.
Of chick versus broad.
What is it? I think broad is worse.
So it seems like general consensus is broad is worse.
Really? How's broad worse?
I've heard, I've seen a bunch with broad, but the only one that's really been focusing on chick, the term chick implies incompetent, naive, and dumb.
What about broad? What does that imply?
That was the one comment we got. Broad is worse. Both are bad. Stop sexually objectifying cougars. I can get away with calling my wife old lady. Broad though is not acceptable.
What about cougar? Cougar, I think is hot for some reason. Cougar, I don't. It's something about that word that just works.
And then someone said they called U.S. Women Marines BAMs, which means broad and then but the curse word for butt that we can't say on radio. Marines. That's what BAM stands for.
Yeah.
So broad in that case has been colloquialized into broads.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, oh, you have to be a butch girl then, and it's like, yeah. So that's, I guess, why it's bad.
Fair enough. All right. I've been
Those are your
properly
results.
chastised. Yeah. I thought chick was worse, but okay, fair enough. But everybody agrees cougar is awesome.
Oh yeah.
Cougar is awesome.
I guess I won't use either of those, but cougars.
Cougar
you want to hit me up? My phone number is and break.
You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. We're going to come back with some of the videos, and the first video is on the Ukrainian president a few days ago, basically saying this is no worse than a year or so ago. Calm down. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show.
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Austin Pelly, Spaghetti Man, coming to you live out of our station.
Never going to live that down now.
Washington, D.C.
Andre's dying in the back room now because he said this as a joke, and then Jack was like, "Spaghetti Man."
I love that.
And now I said it once, and now you.
I love it because it puts me in the mind of the Milkman from when I was growing up. But that's not the point. If you guys are in the area, DC area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Austin and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. And as we were discussing earlier this morning, there was this clash at the UN Security Council. The United States called for the Security Council. Russia didn't necessarily want to do it. There were several states that backed Russia. There were several that backed the United States. And considering that we did have that council meeting yesterday, clearly the U.S. had the numbers on their side. Right now, or yesterday, you had Sergei Lavrov, or let's say Russia or Moscow, delivered a written response to Blinken's or the United States written response, even though they're being somewhat coy in regards to what's in that response. And you're also going to have meetings taking place today between Blinken and Lavrov. So basically, these negotiations and discussions are continuing. However, the back and forth and the world point of view that is taking place at the UN Security Council yesterday was actually quite fascinating. And Russia basically repeated what we've repeated here. This is being created a certain amount of hysteria around the invasion idea of the Ukraine. And that is being prompted almost entirely by the United States. Yes, it has its vassal states with it that will basically back it up to greater or lesser measures. But the reality of it is this shouldn't necessarily be an issue. We're being dragged to the brink by an administration that basically wants to dictate terms to the rest of the world. And one of the countries that the United States is supposedly doing this for is not even on board with what the United States is saying. And I'm talking about Ukraine. Let's play the clip. This is Ukraine. I believe this was 2 or 3 days ago, with President Zelensky basically saying, calm down. You guys are freaking the public out, and we don't agree with this imminent invasion stuff. Let's play the clip.
Today we are not speaking about more escalation than before. Yes, the number of soldiers have increased. But as I have said about it in the beginning of 2021, when we were talking about the drills of the Russian Federation, when there was a concentration of Russian military, that time the US and our European friends urged Russia to withdraw troops. I do not think that the situation is worse now than it was at the peak of those drills.
I don't think the situation is worse now than the peak of those drills. When was the peak of those drills? Early in 2021, when this initially took place. So wait. So all of this stuff that the United States has been saying about provocation, about Russia on the border, about Russia invading, et cetera, Ukraine, Zelensky, the person in charge of that country that is supposed to be invaded, is basically saying nothing has fundamentally changed with the exception of the hyperbolic rhetoric coming out of the United States. Let's play the next clip. Now, this is at the Security Council itself. This is the United States making their statement, basically saying they want peace, but they're unified with Europe. And think about that for the moment. Is Europe unified on this particular issue? France, Poland, Hungary, et cetera, many of these countries have been talking about forming their own military with a foreign policy separate from the United States. That doesn't look like unity to me. Macron, again, is having conversations himself with Putin. You have other countries that seem to demur from this idea of either having troops in their countries or, for that matter, even flying in their airspace. But sure, NATO is united. Let's play the clip.
The United States, along with our European allies and partners and other nations around the globe concerned by Russia's threat to Ukraine, have continued to do everything we can to resolve this crisis peacefully. In all of these talks, our messages have been clear and consistent. We seek the path of peace. We seek the path of dialogue. We do not want confrontation, but we will be decisive, swift, and united should Russia further invade Ukraine.
What do you mean further invade Ukraine? I was unaware that Russia had invaded Ukraine. I do remember that the Crimea took a vote that they wanted to leave at the point where the democratically elected government basically collapsed in this kind of violent coup. And the groups, or various groups, the breakaway regions of the Ukraine decided in a vote, that they didn't necessarily want to be in a country and a government overrun basically by Nazis that hate their guts. To keep going, we have another clip. This one is from Russia. And this is Russia basically responding to the claims about an invasion. Let's play the clip.
The discussions about a threat of war is provocative in and of itself. You are almost calling for this. You want it to happen. You're waiting for it to happen as if you want to make your words become a reality. This is despite the fact that we are constantly rejecting these allegations. And this is despite the fact that no threat of a planned invasion into Ukraine from the lips of any Russian politician or public figure over this period has been made. No such threat has been made. Rather, at all levels, we've been categorically rejecting such plans.
Very clear. Categorically, we've rejected such plans. We've never said we were going to invade the country. We did say that if our security interest is not met, we did say that if you guys aren't paying attention to the things that we need or the things that we are concerned about, that can create a situation in which we will go in. But all things being equal, if it's left to us, we're not invading. Very clear, very straightforward. He goes further and makes a point of saying, look, even though we don't necessarily have any plans to invade, we are concerned about certain provocation in Ukraine in and of itself that may, let's say, create a crisis or provocative crisis that forces our hand. And of course, Russia's point is, look, if you guys are going to continue to expand and include NATO or Ukraine in NATO, be it in fact or de facto, then that is a grave security concern for our country, and we can't tolerate that. That's what it boils down to, basically. And we have one more clip. This is China. China is interesting in this case. The United States reportedly reached out to China to try to get China's assistance, which is extraordinary that they would do something like that, considering the tenor that the United States has taken towards China for the last several years. I mean, for God's sake, said genocide, saying that the China virus, quote unquote, they're stealing our jobs. One thing after the next, everything but a child of God we've called China. And yet, in this particular moment, the U.S. reaches out. China basically just gives the United States a lesson, calling it their fault, and talks about the provocation in the Ukraine. But this is China at the UN Security Council. Listen to what China says here. They're backing Russia.
China opposes the Security Council's holding of this open meeting as requested by the United States. What we urgently need now is quiet diplomacy, not microphone diplomacy.
We need quiet diplomacy, not microphone diplomacy. Also, what are your thoughts, man? This meeting was somewhat contentious. Both sides were basically giving their image of the world. Like they would, when they talk about their image. Russia's invading Ukraine and we were no longer, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, dude, that's not typically what took place. And even the language that we're using, oh, we want peace. We want this, even though we're kind of drawing this, creating all sorts of fervor around this particular issue that didn't really need to be a particular issue. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's funny, your clip that said the U.S. has done everything to ensure peace and not escalate. Oh, come on. You don't even believe that while you're saying it.
She can't even get it out without,
But forgive me if I'm wrong, but didn't Russia say, like, we're done with these talks if nothing's coming out of them?
Yeah.
And the fact that they're back in
is something coming out of them.
Maybe, well, I wasn't taking it like that. I was taking it as maybe the U.S. needed something crazy to get Russia back to the table. Because it seems like the U.S. is just basking in this bad press PR storm. And if they can extend it as long as possible, then, I mean, if Biden paints someone else as an enemy, he's not the enemy for the American public.
Yeah.
So if they can keep Russia engaged and keep having conversations with them, even with no intention of actually doing anything.
They can avoid the domestic politics. So
exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a little conspiratorial.
It's like a wag the dog. Do you know, so back during Bill Clinton's time, when Bill Clinton, I believe he attacked, I believe it was Serbia, wag the dog is what came out. It was during the Monica Lewinsky thing. That was I don't know if we can say it on the air, but you guys know what it is. The whole Lewinsky thing, the cigar and all that good stuff with Clinton. Depends on what your definition of is Bill Clinton. And during that time, all of that was in the news. That was the only thing that was in the news. And all of a sudden, Clinton comes out of nowhere and attacks a country. And it was like, whoa, what is Clinton doing? Did Clinton attack that country because he wanted to get the news story away from Lewinsky onto this other topic? And they used the term wag the dog. It was based on this kind of movie, I believe, by the same name, where the country did something similar. I believe they pretended there was an attack on Canada or something like that. I don't remember the entire storyline, but that's where the term came from. Wag the dog, wag the dog. Is this a modified wag the dog by Joe Biden, who can't deal with the political and the domestic politics here, and so he's looking for something else to change the headline? In which case, you get this kind of provocation with Ukraine, where it's like, okay, we're going to create an international incident where there doesn't need to be an international incident. And by doing so, the media is going to focus on that, and they're going to stop talking about
it
failing.
seemed like for like a decade, 2 decades, it's been slowly but steadily increasing good relations with Russia.
Yes.
And Biden came into office, all of a sudden, we're like pre-Cold War, just drop right back. And I'm like, well, if you already were doing that with China, as Russia has been like, hey, you know what? We've been on good terms with Russia.
Yeah.
We've been declining with China.
Yes.
And as those two things were like, I just kept seeing like, oh, okay, so then Russia's not the big bad enemy, the big bad wolf anymore. It's China. Yeah. So that's the natural progression. And then all of a sudden, this Russia drop. I'm like, why are we focusing on 2 countries?
Yeah.
And is that what we need to do right now?
Idea?
This was entirely in Biden's presidency.
Yes, it was.
So,
but and this is kind of the argument that I used to make before, that the momentum of Russiagate wasn't going to stop at Russiagate, meaning it wasn't going to stop at Hillary Clinton, whatever they were. And even with Donald Trump, there was never going to be the situation where Russiagate, okay, stop. Now we're talking about something else. Meaning the momentum or the psyop that was ran on all of those Democrats, that energy is still there. That emotional resonance is still there. And so my point, even back then, like a year or so ago, I was like, the moment where either Trump's get out of office or something to that effect, it's not going to stop. It's just going to keep going. And all of these young Democrats, regardless of what the brain trust of the party knows to be true, the people who are accepting that information, the people who are in that wavelength, those people are still going to take that and continue on with it. Meaning this kind of Russophobia stuff or this hatred towards Russians because they helped Donald Trump get elected was never going to stop at Clinton. And even when Trump gets out of office, that emotion, that feeling, that resonance is still there. And so when Biden gets into policy and everything else is still there. And I hope that makes sense. It's almost like the moment that Biden takes office, he's taking office with another bunch of Democrats. And that group of Democrats have in their heads that Russia was intimately related to getting Trump in office. And so it's like, if Biden, or if you're going to get a Democrat in office, that was just going to come along with it. Like, you were always going to end up in this kind of Cold War mentality just because of what the public has been seeded with.
But
over
that's
these
just
last
saying,
years.
like, I'm solidified in my beliefs even though I've been proven wrong.
Yes.
Again and again and again and again.
That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. I mean, think about it for yourself. Clinton comes up with this thing of Trump and Russia, Trump and Russia, Trump and Russia. All right. The Democrats eat it full hog. The media eats it full hog. All of them hate Donald Trump, and they're looking for anything to hit Trump with. Great. Trump loses and gets out of the race. It's the sentiment and the feeling that was created by media and the Democratic Party in their opposition to Trump. Does it just go away immediately when Trump leaves? The answer is no. And so it's like, I don't know any situation that Biden could have taken power, got in office, and it not ended up like this. Do you remember when Mitt Romney was running and they said something to that effect? Mitt Romney was like, Russia is our greatest enemy. And it was like, get out of here, get out of here. And then immediately switches up.
I was 9. I remember him. Yeah, I remember him running.
Yeah.
That's pretty much the extent of it.
During that race, Romney
I kept hearing Mitt Romney. I kept hearing the term like, "Oh man, you're whiter than Mitt Romney in a snowstorm."
Right.
And I was like, who's Mitt Romney? And I saw he's a presidential candidate. Yeah.
But Romney had made this thing of saying Russia was our main geopolitical foe. And it was like, get out of here, get out of here. Obama joked them. The media laughed at him and everything else. And all of a sudden, this is where we are. So, but let's do this. Let's take a break. It's greatly unfortunate, man, because you're right. The relations with Russia seem to have been improving for years. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden.
And it took a long time to get there.
Yeah, it did. It really did. And so this is where we are, though. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. We will be back with the one and only Ted Rall. Back shortly.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Austin Pelly, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. And we have several conversations we want to get to, but I want to continue with the conversation with U.S. and Russia at the UN Security Council meeting. To have a conversation with us, we're joined with Ted Rall. Ted Rall is a political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. Ted, what's going on, my man?
Not much. Just digging out of the COVID hole, slowly but surely. How about you?
What's the digging out of the COVID hole? You had COVID?
You got it?
Yeah, I had COVID. It feels like long COVID. It was December 30th that I tested positive, and it's been a struggle ever since.
Oh, wow. You're still feeling, and I can still hear it a little bit in your voice, or it sound a little bit hoarse. I'm sorry to hear that, man. I really am.
Thank you.
Yeah, so let's do this. There are multiple domestic stories I want to get to, but before we get to domestic politics, I definitely wanted to get your take on the UN Security Council meeting. Russia has continuously said, we're not trying to invade Ukraine. We don't want to invade Ukraine, but we have security concerns that we have to pay attention to, and we're not going to allow you to get to a point where it's the fait accompli, meaning we're not going to allow you to circle us in a way where if we ever have a disagreement, that you already have force and numbers availed in such a way where we have no option and we can't push back on. That's just good sense. No country would allow themselves to be surrounded by a hostile force in such a manner. And the United States, to their point, they're like, Russia is about to invade Ukraine. This is a problem. We need to draw and bring the world into it. And we are completely united with our European allies, which, as Austin kind of pointed out, that is not true at all. But what is your thought on this? You've been paying attention to politics and geopolitics for God knows how long. What are your thoughts on this kind of meeting back and forth and what took place in the Security Council yesterday?
Well, Russia's been very patient. They've been dealing with U.S. encirclement policies for decades, and it's finally something that they're, that is at the fore, and the world is paying attention to. I'm surprised that it took so long for this to finally become a topic of something that Americans would concentrate upon. I mean, you're talking about there's the missiles that were stationed in Poland many years ago. Right after 9/11, the U.S. attempted to set up they set up bases to fight the war on terror in Afghanistan, in former Soviet republics of Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, and they even sort of got involved in a rent dispute over an air base in Kyrgyzstan that sort of led to the toppling of the elected president at the time. And then, there's also obviously NATO, which was a Cold War Western European military alliance, has pushed past Central Europe into Eastern Europe, into the former Soviet Union. Meanwhile, just look how aggressive those moves are on the part of the United States, a country that has over 800 military bases around the world. So many that if you call the Pentagon and you ask them how many military bases do we have, they actually can't. They don't really know. It changes all the time. The number's so big. Russia has exactly one military base outside of the former Soviet Union. It's in Syria. That's it. So, it's kind of ridiculous to have the U.S. Portraying itself as, we're blameless here. What? Why are you mad at us? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, why are you mad at us? Why are you guys pointing fun? We're just trying to do peace, and we're just trying to have a peaceful, coexistence, et cetera, et cetera. Pay no attention to the fact that we're, creating all sorts of provocation in that region. I want to get into some of the domestic politics with you while we're talking about it. Rachel Maddow is leaving, apparently, or at the very least, she's stepping away for a bit of time. She basically told her audience, I'm going to take a little bit of time off from the show. And I'm nervous about all of this. It's a change in my life, but it's all for the good. And the wild part is, right here, there may be another eventual hiatus again sometime in the future, Miss Maddow, but for now, we're taking it one step at a time. Maddow is apparently unhappy, or at the very least wants to do something else. But if I excuse me, I'm sorry. If I remember correctly, there was this kind of talk for years now that Maddow wanted to take time off, or she was unhappy with continuously doing the show. What does this mean? Especially for people, let's say liberals, who look at that show as their way of organizing their world. Love that woman to death. Now that she's stepping down, and more importantly, why is she stepping down? Is it because she spent the last 3 years boosting a conspiracy theory? Is it because she just has other items that she wants to deal with? Is it because she feels like she's being dictated to in regards to what she can talk about versus not. What are your thoughts on this, Ted?
Well, I doubt that it's her promoting Russiagate.
Right.
She feels guilty about that. I mean, obviously, she is kind of in progressive circles literally become the embodiment of the word sellout.
Yes.
Someone came from another planet and said, "What is a sellout?" And any progressive would say, "Well, there's this woman on 9 o'clock on MSNBC." So that's. I don't know if she's so far gone. I suspect she's probably so far gone and drunk so many gallons of Kool-Aid at 30 Rock that she's probably not really, thinking about that anymore. She's spectacularly wealthy. I think it's probably more of a lifestyle thing than anything else. Look, it's a grind too. She's at that network every single day, overseeing and participating in research, doing show prep, and it's every single day. And TV is very intense, and you can't, it's like every mistake is magnified. So I would think that it would just become exhausting over time. Everybody who's done this for over the years has just come out of it. It's exciting and exhilarating, but it can wreck you. So I suspect it's more about that. The network, I think, has kind of become stale. She is their biggest star, and all they really do is just move their personalities around from one time slot to the next. There's really little to no new blood there. And the message has always been, they call it MSDNC, but it's become increasingly like robotic and repetitive. I mean, it's like listening to, the Weather Channel where, there's just not that much going on every day. It's always the same. I think they have an entertainment problem. Fox, their secret sauce is that they're entertaining, and MSNBC is dull.
Yeah, no, I agree. I also think that news is this weird medium where you can be that vehemently wrong of, let's say, Russiagate and the Steele dossier, and make your career from it, and still find work after and be paid and demand more pay for it, and it's crazy. And I think that what you were saying about how like Maddow is filthy rich at this point, she doesn't need this. So my next question is this a hiatus? Is she? I do think she's probably sick of being this. Pointed to like you're just a shell. You represent something else, and you've gotten it wrong very recently. Like the scapegoat of the left. Whether or not she deserves it is another conversation. So I think, she's probably fed up with it. If she can just disappear from the limelight a little bit and just spend her money or invest it and retire, I doubt that she comes back into this because, everyone who I talk to about my job is just news beats you up. Mm-hmm. Every day you go in and every day the media and websites and newspapers scream at you, hey, you need to lose your head about this today. You need the world's ending because of this. And it changes, but it's always the world ending. It always need to lose your head because that's what sells the most. And it's like, it's a really annoying system. That's the stage of media right now. But Ted, do you see her coming back? Is this a hiatus or is this a retirement from MSNBC?
Strong money on this. She's coming back. It's a hiatus. I've seen this in my own profession. Gary Trudeau, who does Doonesbury, has taken a number of hiatuses. It was quite controversial in the early days when he started doing it because no cartoonist ever did it. Charles Schultz did the same comic strip every single day, no repeats for 50 years. That was just considered like, and that's kind of my work ethic too. I draw one cartoon every day. I've done it since I was 16 years old, no interruptions, even when I was homeless. So it's kind of like, I think now there's sort of an understanding that quality of life counts. I think, I don't see the point of working every single day the way she does. Especially when you're just doing it, you're just reading off a teleprompter, and you're reading propaganda. It's not like she's spreading what she thinks is like the good progressive news. Mm-hmm. She came out of Air America. I guest hosted alongside her at Air America. she was a progressive, or at least she played one on the radio.
Well, she probably was one in real life. And that's kind of what I'm getting to. Like, is it possible that she's unhappy because this is not what she thought she was going to be doing? Like, I remember back when Rachel Maddow first came out, I used to enjoy her show. Her, Keith Olbermann. When Bush was in office, you have all these people who are extremely, or at the very least looked extremely lefty. And then Obama gets in office. He's like, wait a minute, these guys are, the stuff that they were okay or hated Bush for, they're okay with Obama for. But if you think about it, if she was this kind of Rhodes Scholar and her thing was, I want to talk about these lefty topics and everything else, and then her job goes from that to everything is about Trump. And I'm going to spend 3 years talking about a Russiagate thing that ended up being false. Like, is it that? Like, is she experiencing a certain degree of either depression? I remember reading stuff talking about depression, or just basic unhappiness at the direction of the show, that she would do something different. I mean, one of the things that they were making the point of saying that she wanted to do her own engagements. Like you said, part of it was the grind, where this notion that it's every night, night after night after night after night, there's no let up. But also, I wonder if other part of that is, look, this is not exactly what I want to be doing. I've become basically a propaganda outlet for the Democratic Party, and all things being equal, I would rather do my own thing. I'm just curious if it's that part, which, again, I'm not sure. But you know her better than I do. Like you say, you work with her at Air America. What do you lean on that?
Oh, I mean, it's certainly true that she sold out, or either she sold out or she genuinely moved to the right to become a corporate Democrat, one or the other. But she sold out, I think, by most objective standards, and probably by the standards, by her own standards of, let's say, the 1990s, right? But, in terms of her, is she in psychological denial about it? Is she cool with it? That's only something that, say, a G. Gordon Liddy who breaks into her psychologist's office is ever going to be able to there's just no way to tell that.
Yeah.
Ted, if I can shift it here, I'm curious to get your take on this Supreme Court nomination that's been very hot in the cycle, and Biden says it has to be a black female, and that is who will fill the seat. Because you know what? That's the only box we might see from the campaign promises to now. What I'm curious about is it's pretty widely accepted at this point that Democrats will lose the majority when we get to the midterms, 9-10 months out. Mm-hmm. Can Congress hold out on approving that pick? And will we see Sinema and Manchin shoot down any nomination, and then there is no chance of it coming after that midterm?
I don't think there's any chance of Manchin or Sinema blocking the nomination. And I don't think that the Republicans can drag their feet in any way to prevent this confirmation from going through before Democrats almost certainly lose the Senate this coming November. However, it's a nail-biting majority. Mm-hmm. This is a bunch of old people. Old people get sick. Old people could get COVID. Old people can have aneurysms. Old people can have heart attacks. They are one senator away. A senator could have a family crisis where he or she themselves are fine, but their kid's in trouble, and they've got to be close to their kid, their spouse, whatever. All they are is one absent senator away from not having the votes. And as usual, we have the Republican teases like Susan Collins, like, I might come through for you guys. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Lucy and the football to bring up peanuts twice in the same conversation. It's like the truth is the Democrats have to keep their conference healthy, wealthy, and wise until that vote. And, anything can go wrong. Look at what happened with Paul Wellstone.
Good point. I was thinking not Elizabeth Warren. I was thinking when Obama was in office, he had the supermajority. And I can't think of the gentleman's name, but it was in Massachusetts where he ends up taking over. Democrats go down to 59 votes. And any plan that Obama wanted to do at that point was off the table. I can't think of the guy's name, but it was Scott. No, it was Scott.
No.
Scott something. It was from Massachusetts. But yeah, same point. I mean, if they lose one, their majority is basically toast. And so they got to get this stuff accomplished. I have a hard time believing that Manchin and Sinema jump in and stop that also. I mean, who knows? Manchin or Sinema, who knows what's in her mind at this point? It's It's an unknown. One of the things I want to get to a little bit is Donald Trump. Trump is running again. Well, at least I think he's running again. I think he is. Or at the very least, the people around him say he's running again. And he's, of course, keeping himself in the media. New York Times was reporting that Trump enters 2022 with $122 million in the bank, basically twice as much as Republican National Committee. Can Trump make it through a Republican primary? Now, I know people are like, of course he can make it through the Republican primary. But is that entirely true? I mean, there are going to be certain people who are still going to go after him. And is his policy on COVID a weakness? And what I mean by that are the shutdowns. I mean, if you think of the positions that, let's say, certain like DeSantis have taken or some of the Republicans have taken, it's true that they basically picked up the manner where Trump left off and kind of expanding it into their own little state or whatever. But is Trump going to get hit if he runs again for shutting down the economy, for example, for some of his policies on either vaccinations? Like, is that going to be something that's going to allow him, is that going to be, let's say, a headwind for him trying to get through the primary?
No, I'll start with the second part. The GOP does not care about that in significant numbers. That's water under the bridge. It is gone. It doesn't matter. Trump is fondly remembered as the unapologetic right-wing, true blue fighter. And that's what Republican voters are looking for. Now, the thing is, the math is what's interesting about the primaries. When he announced in 2015, he was one of a huge field, of up, I think it was
like 22 people or something, 21, 22 people.
Like roughly 20, right? He came out of the gate with 30%. And that basically defines the primary campaign to the end, because let's just say he had 6 major opponents in that group. They all split up the rest of the vote. So, I think you had people like Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, polling at like 15, 16, 14%. Well, you could just never recover. They divided up the anti-Trump contingent. If you had a different scenario, if let's just say you only had a DeSantis running against Trump, that's a different calculus. Now, I still think Trump wins because now it's a different world. He's an ex-president. He's polarized everything. It's his party. I still think he gets the Republican nomination. And the RNC isn't the DNC. There's no fix in. Whoever wins, wins.
Right.
But, I think basically it's to Trump's advantage that he either run completely unopposed or that he run against a bunch of opponents.
Yeah. No, I could subscribe to that. I get that for sure. But if I can shift a little bit, we have a Georgia prosecutor, District Attorney Fani Willis, asked the FBI for protection after Trump's rally or speech in Texas, where he was saying that if it means pardoning the January 6 people, then we're going to look into pardons. He didn't strictly say he was going to pardon everyone. But is Fani Willis right here? Is she thinking like, oh, man, now they're going to come for me. They've stormed the Capitol building. They're going to storm my courthouse. They're going to drag me out. Hang Mike Pence. No, hang Fani Willis. So is she right now to ask the FBI, or is this another media stunt? Oh, let's paint Trump as the new KKK Klansman.
Well, as someone who has gotten death threats, I would never tell anyone who feels that they're in danger that they shouldn't seek out police protection. I think that's her call to make. And, it's a scary place to be, and it's really easy from the outside to be like, oh, come on, you have nothing to worry about. But, we don't know what she's hearing and the kinds of messages or emails or whatever she's getting. So, I think if you feel like you're in danger, then, then look out for yourself by all means. It's hard to assess these things. I wouldn't, nothing's real until you really know it. Of course, the Gretchen Whitmer BS kind of does come to mind when you mention that.
I think I agree with you. I mean, look, I am not going to tell this woman to not be overly concerned about the president of the United States on a bully pulpit. Well, he's not the president, but you know what I mean. Still, he has that huge number of following, tens of millions of people. that he is basically directing and putting a circle around the prosecutor's efforts in order to investigate Trump. Yeah, I think she should be concerned. Right here. Security concerns were escalated this weekend by the rhetoric of President Trump at the public event in Conroe, Texas. Right here. He said, I'm asking, where is it? Basically, he pointed a finger at the various prosecutors. Right here. He's pointing a finger at the various prosecutors, calling them, vultures or something to that effect. And at the point where the president is basically circling or singling you out, and this is after January 6th, meaning she already knows the gravity of Donald Trump from the standpoint of his ability to bring all of these people to the Capitol, these people to believe him on this notion of a lie and everything else that he lost the race or that he won the race, and have those people basically respond to that action. And so if you have, 2% of that population is not rap tight, does that 2% create a threat or danger to the person in Georgia? I would say yes. I'll say yes. So I'm not necessarily going to falter for it, even though I think I know where Austin is coming from. What this was like, dude, I am so sick of them talking about Trump.
Well, I definitely am. And this one was actually posed as a genuine question because I was just interested on both sides here.
Yeah.
I agree. If you are getting death threats or if you think that something's going to taint the trial even, okay, look into some protective measures. But I also see how, if I say that Trump is just a general and he's dispatching his minions now to come get me, it's been the tactic of the left for how long now? 2, 3, 4 years, ever since Trump was in office, of just making him look absolutely horrible, whether he has deserved it or hasn't.
Yeah. And so so it always brings a question when you're doing stuff like this. On Saturday, Trump said, if these radical, vicious, racist prosecutors do anything wrong or illegal, I hope we're going to have in this country the biggest protest we've ever had in Washington, D.C., in New York, in Atlanta, and elsewhere. So I guess her point is, if these radical, vicious, racist prosecutors, and I guess she, considers herself one of those prosecutors that is being disparaged here by Trump.
And there's this comment I want to read out. It says, you mean to tell me her job is to send away actual murderers, but she fears political rhetoric, as she said to the press. It's the political rhetoric. It's looking like an act. That's their opinion, and they're entitled to it, sure. But
what are your thoughts, Ted? Do you think that's an act, or do you think that's a little bit more severe?
I have to say, again, I had people poo-poo me when I got death threats, and I took steps to look out for myself. I don't think I can't think it's an act. I mean, what if we just speculate and say, well, it's not serious, and then something happens to her? How are we going to look? How are we going to feel?
Absolutely.
So I think it's kind of always better to err on the side of caution. And look, I mean, you don't even need 2%. It's 0.02% of the population is cray-cray. Something.
Wow. I think regardless, after all this is giving some really bad flashbacks of Esther Salas, the judge that the man posed as a mailman and came to her residence and shot her son and father, her son Daniel, who passed away.
Yeah.
He attended Catholic U with me. He actually played on the Frisbee team with me. So all this said and done, I don't want to discount anyone who's genuinely risking their life or genuinely has some concerns about their life.
She probably is scared, yeah.
I think overall, we need to pass Daniel's Law, which came after this act, and it basically says the personal information of judges needs to be sealed. It cannot be public record because there's no reason why, if you're sentencing people, that your address should be out there.
You're clearly going to create, crisis in various people's lives. Ted, thank you, my man. Ted Rall, he's a political cartoonist and syndicated columnist. You can follow Ted at Ted Rall on Twitter and read his cartoons at Rall.com. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. We'll be back in a moment.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I'm your ever vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the right corner, I'm the most vital eye since Italian cream and doll worship, your political analyst, Austin Pelly.
That means you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly.
There's no way you got this one.
Yeah, I didn't get this one.
Okay,
I'm
cool.
the most vital eye since Talon, cream, and doll worship. I don't know what this one is. You lost me on this one.
Italian.
Oh, okay. I am the
cream.
most vital Italian.
And idol worship.
Fair
I told you they would get more obscure.
Fair enough. I like it. Still love it. Let's go to the headlines. Shout out to Ted Rall. Thank you very much, Ted, for joining us. Like I said, Ted has been all around the world. He's great on pretty much all of these things. But in the news, yesterday in the United States, there were 456,871 new COVID cases reported, along with 2,558 new deaths. The number's still going down. Deaths are still, remaining even. Over the past week, there's been an average of about 469,931 cases per day, a decrease of 41% from the average 2 weeks ago. 64% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 75% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 74,989,453 people across the United States and has killed an unfortunate 885,938 men, women, and children in this country. In national news, strict precautions to keep President Joe Biden protected for the coronavirus could threaten to undercut his administration's efforts to tell Americans, especially those vaccinated and boosted like the president, that they can get on with something closer to a normal life in the face of Omicron. When Biden met with U.S. governors at the White House on Monday, he was the only one given a glass of water, lest anyone else remove their mask to take a drink. The president was seated more than 10 feet away from everyone else, including Vice President Kamala Harris and members of his cabinet. A White House staffer who was wearing a surgical mask when Biden entered the room was quickly handed an N95 version. These are just some of the extraordinary efforts on the part of the White House to keep the president from getting COVID-19, an effort that started before the now 79-year-old was elected by focusing on remote events from a studio in his basement of his Delaware home. Wow. Kicking off Black History Month, at least half of a dozen historically black colleges and universities fielded bomb threats yesterday across 5 states and, of course, D.C. After issuing a shelter-in-place and a sweep of the campus, no explosive devices were found at any of the schools. The threats came yesterday, the day before Black History Month, and are riding on the back of a series of threats to the same and other black campuses on January 4th. The colleges, FBI, and ATF will continue to investigate and monitor the situation. In an update, UCLA has switched to remote learning in response to these threats out of, quote, an abundance of caution, unquote. U.S. regulators are urging drug maker Pfizer to apply for emergency authorization for 2-dose regimen of its COVID-19 vaccine for children 6 months to 5 years old, while waiting data on 3-dose course, aiming to clear the way for the shots as soon as February. A person familiar with the matter told the Associated Press. Now, the Food and Drug Administration is pushing the company to submit its application based on the 2-dose data for potential approval in February, and then to return for additional authorization once it has the data for the 3rd-dose study, which is expected in March, a person familiar with the matter said. The 2-step authorization process could mean that young children could be vaccinated more than a month earlier than previous estimates, assuming the FDA and the CDC green-light the shots. The United States federal prison system is currently on lockdown after a gang altercation took place earlier this month. 2 inmates were killed during the fight, and another 2 were injured at a penitentiary in Texas. The incident happened around 11:30 a.m. yesterday at USP Beaumont. The altercation involved members of the MS-13 street gang. U.S. District Judge Lisa G. Wood on Monday rejected the plea deal reached by prosecutors and Travis McMichael on the hate crime charges, a plan that would have precluded his federal trial in the killing of Ahmaud Arbery. Earlier, McMichael had agreed to plead guilty to a single hate crime charge, interference with rights, in exchange for prosecutors recommending he serve 30 years in federal prison. Wood said he was not comfortable with the sentencing guidelines of the agreement. The judge had been expected to rule separately on the same plea deal for McMichael's father, Gregory McMichael. But after the judge's rejection of the son's plea deal, attorneys for both McMichaels asked for more time to decide whether to change their pleas to guilty. The next hearing will be on Friday.
This is the one that I want to hit later. Way more than just a normal headline segment because I have a lot of thoughts coming after this.
Oh, cool. Okay. We can come back to it after the headlines, and we can always have a segment on it separately. The United States and Russia bitterly attacked each other over the Ukraine crisis in a diplomatic brawl Monday at the UN Security Council in a session replete with acidic language that could have been lifted from the Cold War era. The Americans, backed by the Western allies, accused Russia of endangering peace and destabilizing global security by massing more than 100,000 on Ukraine's border, while Kremlin diplomats dismissed what they call baseless and hysterical U.S. fear-mongering aimed at weakening Russia and provoking armed conflict. The meeting of the 15-nation Security Council requested by the United States last week had not been expected to produce any diplomatic breakthroughs. Basically, megaphone diplomacy. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson apologized and vowed to fix it after a report on Monday into lockdown parties held at Downing Street residents criticized serious failures at the heart of the government. A limited report by senior civil servant Sue Gray on Monday found that alcohol-fueled events had taken place at Downing Street when the lockdown rules were enforced. Gray said there had been serious failures of leadership, quote unquote, and that some of the events should not have been permitted. After initially saying that no rules were broken, Johnson has repeatedly declined to answer specifics about his own attendance at some of the gatherings. Opinion polls show British voters felt Johnson should resign, 69% in Savannah.com's Res poll and 63% in YouGov survey. Wow. The overwhelming majority of the country wants him to resign over that. Amazing. In Earth and Science news, the longest lightning bolt has been recorded on Monday in the United States, spanning 477 miles over 3 states. Experts said lightning does not normally span more than 10 miles for a single flash. Also in 2020, a single flash in Argentina hit the longest time a lightning bolt struck, hitting 17.1 seconds. What does that look like? I don't even know what that looks like.
It looks like
just a flash.
God's taser.
Yeah.
To the world.
Yeah. Just yeah. Wow. In holiday news, it is National Freedom Day, first day of National Black History Month. And in Bulgaria, it's Day of Remembrance and Respect to the victims of the communist regime. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. Yeah, I can't fathom that. How did they know it was 47 miles long?
I'm sure we have tech now to
basically take a picture of it.
I think it's from telescopes.
Okay. Oh, I see.
Or satellites. Telescopes.
Okay, that makes more sense. Because I was like, how did they know that? I mean, you're seeing in one state, how are you? But yeah, that makes more sense. Let's go back to the Marbury thing.
Actually, I want to hit that another hour. What I want to talk about is why are we pushing for an approval of a vaccine for 6 months to 5-year-old children? And basically, the only way that Pfizer's been doing this is the only way that they can get it approved is if they take their shot that they already have and tone it down like crazy.
Right.
Because you have to decrease the viral load for kids because they might not be able to handle the side effects as much.
Right.
So why are we risking the side effects with children who virtually at a rate of like 0.02% die from COVID? And they can spread it just the same. We've already proven that.
Yeah.
With an already diminished shot.
Yeah.
That doesn't prove very effective against Omicron, and especially the 2.0 version of Omicron. So why are we trying to vaccinate 6-month-old 5 to 5-year-olds?
Yeah.
5-year-olds.
That's pretty young.
My new nephew just got COVID when I got COVID too, because his dad gave it to me, my brother. So gave it to his whole family. He had a little bit more of a runny nose.
Yeah.
They had to take out the little booger sucker a little bit more. That was it.
Yeah.
I understand, like, children are our future and being like so viscerally attached to your child. I understand that. This seems like you're putting them probably at more risk of side effects. And the only way to combat that is by toning down the vaccine.
Yeah.
But then it's not going to do anything against Omicron.
I agree with you, believe it or not. And people are like, oh my God, Jamarl agrees with him on that. No, I agree with you on that. I mean, Omicron has been able to break through the vaccinations pretty readily. And even though it's keeping people from death and that type of stuff at 11 to whatever the times it is, well, you still have the situation where what are the likelihood of kids dying in the first place. And that number is so low. Like, it's so, the risk of death for children or for kids, especially when you're talking about like babies or up to 5, is so low in comparison to what it seems like they have to do in order to keep those kids from having other side effects. Like, for example, one of the things with kids, because their immune system is still developing, you don't want to create this kind of weird situation where the immune system is basically creating mutations off of the vaccination itself. Meaning you don't want the body to accommodate the vaccine in such a weird way because the immune system is still developing as a child is getting older. And there's also a second thing of, are you doing this specifically for the kid or are you doing this for the people around that kid? And if you're doing it for the people around that kid, is that right to put the kid at risk?
What are you putting? You're putting your eggs in which basket here? Because are you saying that the boosters are really the best way to combat these new strains, but we need the original shot approved at a toned down amount for our children, which is proving less and less effective by the day as the virus is evolving. So which is it? Because if the boosters are the only way to protect, and these people aren't really in danger range at all, these children. So why aren't you just saying, oh, well, then we just need the vaccine and then booster, and then let's pass it all? No, it's the original shot. It makes no sense.
No, I agree with you on that. I mean, what's the point in forcing kids to get a vaccine if the vaccine is not showing itself?
But also 6 months to 5 years, that's entirely parent dependent. Prior to most schooling ages, 5 years old is about when you go to kindergarten.
So this is not even them in school at this
Exactly.
point. Yeah, this doesn't entirely make sense. I feel like, I know people have made this argument about a money grab, and they try to use that to kind of disparage the vaccinations and everything else. In this case, this probably is more of a money grab.
Do I think that Pfizer and Moderna, by the way, Moderna got full FDA approval yesterday. Do I think that they are for-profit companies?
Of course they are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Does that mean that anything that they come out with should be discounted because of a plight for greed?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
But this one is, I can't get
too far.
behind this one.
Yeah,
it definitely goes too far.
Yeah, I agree with you on this. I can agree with you on this. I mean, even in California, do you remember when I think it was Newsom was trying to mandate that children get vaccinations? And it's like, oh, dude, that's too far. That's too far. I feel the same way about this. I mean, what do they expect? I don't have this huge belief that kids are going to basically drop dead from COVID, or at the very least, the chances of it are very low. If that's true, and if the vaccination hasn't necessarily shown itself to be able to prevent transmissibility, it's like, what's the point of this? So no, I feel you on this. I agree with you on this one. I don't entirely see the point of trying to get this done for kids that are basically infants to 5.
And it's just not effective.
Yeah.
Especially like if you have to tone it down.
Yeah.
And every single day, yes, Pfizer was probably the most effective out of the other vaccines. But every single day, every single new strain, every single version, it becomes less and less and less.
I wonder, is it one of those things, though, that because kids' propensity to get sick is less, that you don't need a vaccine of the same strength as adults? Does that make sense? Like, if I know that this particular kid has a less likely chance to either transmit or to get COVID in the first place, or for that matter, to die from it, do I really need a vaccine at the same level and proficiency as an adult? And maybe the answer is no. Meaning, the fact that it's less may not necessarily matter in the context of what you're trying to get it to do, which is basically to protect that kid who's already on some level already protected just because of his age. Does that make sense?
Among states reporting, which is 46 of them, children were 0.00% to 0.25% of all COVID deaths.
Yeah. That seems like overkill.
A quarter of 0.1%.
Yeah, that seems like overkill. I agree with you on that one. That's too, like, if you want to make the argument for adults, yes. If you want to make the argument for school-age kids, then at the very least, grudgingly, maybe yes. This, too far. I agree with you. I don't necessarily see the point in putting kids or giving kids the stuff if it's not necessarily going to have the effect that you want. Meaning, is it really protecting my kid? And if the answer is no, then why are you giving it to the kid? Agreed.
Falling coconuts kill 150 people a year.
More than the kids that are dying from COVID.
Yes.
It says coconuts kill more people a year than COVID kills.
Actually,
kids.
I don't know if I did the percentage right on that. I'll have to do the math on that. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say that if you want to protect your kid in their carrying case, in their rocker swing, whatever, put a helmet on them, put a coconut visor over them, because that's just as protective.
You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. I think I agree with Austin on this one. We'll be back in a moment. Yeah.
Fault lines. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Austin Pelly, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys happen to find yourself in the D.C. area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Austin and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So as we were having this conversation earlier this morning about the issue pertaining to Ukraine and the United States and Russia basically going at it at the National Security Council, I want to continue with that conversation with our next guest. Our next guest is Michael Maloof. He's a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense, author and regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He also has 30 years of federal service in the U.S. Department of Defense. Mike, thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
Very good, Jamarl. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. And so currently, yesterday, we had the meeting that Russia, the UN National Security Council basically meeting, Russia and the United States going at it, both of them putting forward their, let's say, perspective of what is basically taking place in Ukraine. Russia also delivered a written response to the United States over Ukraine. There's continuing conversations. Apparently, there's a conversation expected between Macron and Vladimir Putin. There's also a conversation expected to take place between Anthony Blinken and Sergei Lavrov today. What is your thought on all of this? I mean, I'm pretty sure you watched the UN Security Council meeting yesterday. Is there anything just starting this conversation off that jumped out at you in that meeting?
Well, excuse me, quite a number of things. Number one, there is a desire by both sides to continue talking. There does not seem to be an appetite for, except maybe on the U.S. side a little bit, to go to war. The United States seems to be pushing its narrative and threatening while it's talking about wanting to have further discussions. It's not providing it's not even attempting in some respects to meet the legitimate concerns by Russia on its own security, given that the United States has come halfway around the world and is threatening with not only sanctions but military assistance to Ukraine against Russia, which has nowhere else to go because it's within its own country. So it's crossing a red line, if you will, on what is that national security imperative for the Russian people. And this is one of the points I think the Russians have pointed out, that the West is, and particularly the United States, is not looking at this problem overall from the perspective of the extent of commitment and threat to Russia, even though such security guarantees were embodied in previous agreements through the OSCE, through the Istanbul protocols, and what have you that preceded all of this. in recognition of the security needs of both sides. And this is what the Russians are trying to get across to the United States. The United States just seems to be tone deaf about it, and yet it's pushing a desire for protection of borders with Ukraine when we're not even protecting our own borders, which has posed a national security threat to the United States. So people are seeing this. The American people are seeing this this conflict, this a discrepancy in our logic and approach. And it once again reinforces the notion that we are undertaking these kinds of foreign adventures, despite our heavy losses in the past, such as Afghanistan, in order to take people's minds off their own internal problems. And this is very stark to me. Mm-hmm. I'm really concerned about it, and I don't know how you overcome that at this point.
Do you think this is a final wake-up call for American media and the agenda that we're pushing to the public? Because, I mean, we had last week the Ukrainian president say, hey, stop, tone it down. You are freaking out our people, and we're the ones who are going to go to war if there is a war. And now after this UN meeting, we had Russia specifically, like one of their main talking points was U.S. rhetoric is horrendous. It's just, it's painting us as aggressors in a war that we have said multiple times we don't want to engage in war. If it's up to us, we will not engage in war. So is this finally time for the American media to tone it down and have the American public finally woken up to the fact that they've been being fed something in their ear for the past however many months?
Well, in a perfect world, you're absolutely right. The corporate media should be toning it down, but they're the ones who are beating this war drum the most. It's almost electronic yellow journalism, if you will, that we're seeing. They want a war. It's almost as though they want a war because it brings in the sponsors and it brings in the ratings. And this is what I'm really concerned about. And real lives are involved here. And when the president of the country that's most affected by this, namely Zelensky of Ukraine, is warning against this kind of rhetoric, that should tell people something, that we are overdoing it over here. And you have to go back into the psyche as to what's driving all of this. A lot of it has to do with the neoconservatives in the Biden administration who are pushing this narrative, notwithstanding any desire by the president himself to want to reach an accommodation. And they are the ones who are putting up the greatest obstacles when the president is diverted onto something else. And that's why we have this this continuing and languishing problem, and it's beginning to become more apparent. And Russia has no other recourse than to prepare its borders, because they are very concerned that elements within, and I'm saying that the United States has been supporting elements from within Ukraine that would love to create and instigate a conflict that would bring on a Russian response, and then it would be on. And I'm talking about the neo-Nazis that we've been supporting, and we got the Azov battalion and all of these groups that are neo-Nazi groups that are very much wanting to have a battle, and they are now incorporated into the Ukrainian military, and they were very instrumental in the coup that took place in Ukraine, and with the backing of then Vice President Biden and Victoria Nuland, who is now the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs. And she's very anti-Russian, and she's made no bones about it. And this is what we're having to contend with. And how do you get around that? And that is the big question. Yeah. And it's going to take the American people to say enough. But how do you say enough? Maybe in 2022 they can say enough if the elections aren't rigged.
Well, there's that, of course. But there's also this. It's from your take. I mean, there's several things that are taking place that are strange. In one case, you brought it up yourself, this notion that the United States is screaming about this kind of imminent attack, and they've invaded Ukraine. I mean, that was the language that she was using at the UN yesterday. And you have Ukraine who's basically saying that's not true. That, stop bringing down the hysteria. You guys are being hyperbolic, et cetera. You guys are freaking us out, et cetera. And so it's like this kind of weird demarcation point between the U.S., who said they're doing this for Ukraine, and Ukraine is basically saying the United States is taking this too far. In fact, we even have the clip. This is Zelensky talking about basically the panic that the United States is creating over this issue. Let's play the clip.
Today we are not speaking about more escalation than before. Yes, the number of soldiers have increased. But as I have said about it in the beginning of 2021, when we were talking about the drills of the Russian Federation, when there was a concentration of Russian military, that time the US and our European friends urged Russia to withdraw troops. I do not think that the situation is worse now than it was at the peak of those drills.
I don't think the situation is worse than at the peak of those drills. And yet, the hysteria is basically that this is going to be an imminent attack. One of the things that you mentioned, too, had to do with Ukraine saying that there was concerns that there's certain elements in Ukraine itself that could create a provocation that forces Russia to get involved into that particular conflict. Well, that was also mentioned yesterday in the talks by the Russian delegation after the meeting, where he brought up, like, look, if this is up to us, we're not going in. By the same token, there are elements in that country that will that basically want this to move forward.
Well, he's right. They're right. They're absolutely right. And I think that what we're going to be seeing here is what we're undercutting really is the effort by the Normandy Protocol, Normandy format people to get together and try to resolve this thing and try to bring Ukraine back under the in compliance with the Minsk II agreements that they agreed to, namely recognizing the autonomy of the disputed areas in eastern Ukraine. And yet we're agitating toward conflict by bringing in more troops into the NATO countries that border on Russia, as well as providing Ukraine, a non-NATO member, with more and more arms. And how do you have an atmosphere and a foundation for negotiation under those conditions?
Yeah,
it's ludicrous.
From your take, how did this start? Like, and when I mean start, I just mean, how did this escalate to what it is now? I mean, yeah, you had the coup that took place.
Right after we were kicked out of Afghanistan by the Taliban, which was horrendous. Just the way we left is the issue. Not that we left, but the way we left is the issue. And then all of a sudden you see Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, U.S. Secretary of Defense, then going into Georgia, talking once again and giving them a reassurance that we haven't forgotten them and wanting to belong to NATO. And then he goes on to the Ukraine and does the same thing. And then we increase military exercises with Ukraine. The NATO forces then do increase military exercises with Ukraine. Again, a non-NATO member. And the question on the part of Russia is, what's the point? What are you trying to do?
Mm-hmm.
What is your motive? And again, this was just after Victoria Nuland had left Moscow and did not agree to terms that had to do with the issues that Russia was concerned about in terms of its own security. And then on top of that, we had layered on top of that was the issue of kicking out Russian diplomats and then trying to from Washington primarily.
Yeah,
and this has now created a problem.
From my perspective, it seems like Europe doesn't want to go to war, especially Germany.
No, of course, no, not only Germany, but you have all the other lesser NATO countries. Denmark, they're going to donate one frigate. Well, big deal. Who's afraid of a Danish frigate?
In Germany, so they were donating helmets or something.
Well, yeah, but their point is we're not going to be providing lethal assistance because they know that will be a major provocation. And also they're disallowing any overflights of NATO countries for assistance flying into Ukraine with military assistance.
Which country
That's
did you
sending a
say
message.
was donating that?
With Britain. Britain was going to be. Britain was told to to go around Germany. Don't fly over Germany to fly in assistance to Ukraine.
Yeah.
So you have these elements within NATO, and it really reflects a fracturing within NATO itself. And you wonder just what commitment NATO would have, and you're not going to have all of and if the Russians had to respond to an attack, then it's going to be you're going to see a number of NATO countries not wanting to be involved. You already have Croatia saying they're not going to send anybody. So it's really very intriguing to see how this could really bust up the EU, and then you have the economic side because of that dependency by all of Europe on Russian oil and gas, as well as the fact that they are in that same proximity, not the United States, but they are, and they know that they would get the brunt of any war.
Yeah, and
not the United States.
It's comforting to know that if Russia invades Ukraine, the Danish would just say frigate. But
exactly.
But where I was going originally was if Europe
very cute
doesn't want the war, if Europe definitely doesn't want the war, except maybe the UK, who at this point at least Bojo is pretty hungry.
Yeah.
And Russia says they don't want a war. Ukraine definitely doesn't want a war,
right.
Especially on their own soil. It seems like the U.S. doesn't want a war, but they love to entertain the possibility of it. That's where our butter zone is. And Russia's been saying that they are not going to come to any more talks and negotiations because nothing's coming out of them. Yet they still come to talks and negotiations to try to get something out of it. Seems like U.S. is just trying to string them along because the longer we can keep this in a cycle, in a news cycle, and make a big bad enemy of Russia, it's just benefiting us. And we get military contracts and all that. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, you're going to have, this is really to support a domestic narrative by the Biden administration to take the American people's minds away from their own internal issues of inflation, the immigration. And you look at the latest polls within the United States, and inflation is the largest problem. And then the second issue is the illegal immigration coming in. And yet we're so concerned about the border of Ukraine. The conflict is just startling. It's just unbelievable. And if people stop and think about it for about 5 to 10 minutes, they're going to see this is crazy. It's insane. And there isn't a war that we don't like. And what could happen is that we may see a cascading effect that if we continue and prolong this effort and push this war drum initiative, it's going to bring on other conflicts that will ensue immediately thereafter. And I'm thinking Taiwan. I'm thinking maybe the Israelis will pull a Dido with Iran, and then you have a 3 to 4 front war that could open up here. And the United States isn't even assessed to be able to fight one front war today, let alone a 4 front war.
Well, yeah, especially by major nations. I mean, because I don't believe for a moment that it will be a conflict with Russia and the U.S. and NATO, and China doesn't get involved, or some of the other countries don't get involved.
We need to get some adult supervision in this room for a change and start laying this all out. But we have people who are supporting, they're looking at everything, particularly on our side, through the prism of ideology, not reality.
Good point.
And I'm really bothered by it.
No, that's a very good point. You're not alone in being bothered by that. And that's kind of why I asked, how did all of this kind of escalation take place? Because it seems irreconcilable. It doesn't seem like, for example, trying to push Zelensky to go to the Minsk Accords. Well, you kind of mentioned it yourself. There's certain elements of the Ukrainian military that are basically Nazis. And so whether they're in the government or not, at the very least, the government responds to the fact. He knows that those are elements that are part of that government and were part of the coup that took place. And so it's like, so his hands, regardless of the pressure, let's say that Europe may be putting on him, or even the United States may be putting on him to go to the Minsk Accords, they know that's not going anywhere. So it feels like there's been a huge escalation, but there's no way to step off the precipice. Tell me if I'm wrong on that. I mean, unless you see a way out of this, a way to kind of step back, or at the very least to save face.
what we're doing is reacting to the immediate events. We're not looking at the overall picture here and finding out, getting to, well, just what started all this. How do we deal with this and tamp it down so that we can lessen tensions? Because there's so much more constructively that we could be doing, but rather than destructively. And I can see what the alternative. Come springtime, I'm really worried about it, because that's when things really are going to start picking up, and not just on the European front, but also in the Middle East once again. And none of this has escaped the attention of Xi Jinping, and he may start putting lowering the hammer on Taiwan as a consequence. And now we have North Korea about ready to pop up again. They're shooting off of missiles. Apparently does not seem to be having the impact that it used to have with the United States. And so you wonder what is going to be his next, Kim Jong-un's next move in concert with these other crises. And this whole thing could be a rising crescendo that we're not going to be able to deal with, or it will be too late to deal with if,
Mike, why do you say
it gets
spring?
out of hand.
By the way, what's spring? Is it just because the weather changes, this kind of fighting weather in the way that they used to talk about it?
Well, we see things begin to pop up more and more with conflicts, because the weather is fairer and people are out more. But if you're going to have an invasion of Ukraine, for example, the wintertime certainly would be the most suitable period, because the ground is harder. It just stands to reason, given the terrain and the topography there, and that can also apply to the Ukrainian from the Ukrainian side to the Russians. So if those elements within the Ukrainian military wanted to instigate something, and this Azov battalion that I pointed out, which has now been integrated into the Ukrainian military, has a network throughout all of Europe. It is a very right-wing element, and I might add that their network extends into the United States. They are actively recruiting former military types to go to Ukraine to fight on behalf of the Ukrainians, and this is something that our government is totally ignoring as well. Maybe we're promoting it, allowing it to happen as a way to get private military contractors in there to do it in lieu of committing troops of any kind. So this is something we've got to be watching. All of this can instigate. And what the Russians, there's another side of this that could come down where we could get some agreement if we can get Stoltenberg to agree to meet with the Russians, and that is a secondary desire, and that is to create buffers for strategic bomber flights, patrols, and military maneuvers in the Black Sea, and to basically, and also a call to renew the intermediate range ballistic missiles, because right now it's unlimited. Each side can bring intermediate range missiles up, and that of course is what Mr. Putin's referring to when he talks about an immediate threat to the Russian Federation, because those missiles can reach almost any point within Russia in minutes.
Mm-hmm. Michael, I want to, in the last few minutes we have with you, I wanted to pivot to North Korea, and they've had 7 missile tests in January. The most recent one being an intermediate range missile capable of reaching Guam from North Korea. So in response to this, the U.S. has sent out, an invitation to enter into negotiations and talks with North Korea, because obviously, or maybe you have a different take on this. We've been saying that it's been kind of a plea for, hey, pay attention to me from North Korea. So why haven't we seen a response from North Korea yet of like, okay, fine, let's enter into these negotiations and talks? Why are they letting it spread out? I mean, we sent this out, I believe, over the weekend, I think on Sunday, and we haven't heard anything yet from North Korea.
No, because I think that they don't feel that they have the proper center of attention as yet because of these other crises. And I think that's why I alluded earlier that if something were to develop in these other areas, in these other regions, then that would give them an opportunity then to agitate more. They want Kim Jong-un wants that attention. He wants to be the center of attention, and he wants sanctions lifted, which are not going to be happening. If the United States could lift some sanctions and give him something as a carrot, that would be fine. Plus, you got you've also got the problem with Iran right now that's brewing, and that is not. They haven't reached any solution there, although all sides, including China, want Iran to come to some agreement on that in order to try to lessen U.S. sanctions. But as long as U.S. sanctions and the U.S. has that control over the Western financial system, all of these countries are going to be affected. And that's why you're seeing them now, including North Korea, driving more toward an alternative world order that is fast emerging here, and along with Russia included in this, under the auspices of the Belt and Road Initiative and also the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So this is something that we're going to have to be watching, and our actions has not tamped down that drive, but has actually helped accelerate it. And you're going to see Europe fracture as a consequence, because they no longer trust the United States in terms of its any of its commitments. And if its companies have been sanctioned as a consequence of dealing with Russia and dealing with Iran, then they're going to look elsewhere for markets, because they are fundamentally exporting nations. They're going to need those markets, particularly in China, India, Iran in the future, and that's where I think things are going to pivot. Mm-hmm. And the United States is going to be basically isolating itself.
So, Michael, when do you see North Korea coming to the table, and what has to happen with the U.S. on the world stage, not concerning North Korea, to then get to talks with North Korea?
I don't see it in the very near future. I don't think the United States has a plan for dealing with North Korea. For some reason, they feel that it's necessary to keep up the agitation against North Korea, to keep the hammer down, hoping maybe the regime will collapse or something. But it's just not going to happen. We don't see that happening. And even our allies in the region are telling us to chill and to come to some arrangement. I think the path that Trump was undertaking with North Korea was leading more towards something, but then you still have the fundamental problem of defining what you mean by a nuclear-free peninsula.
Right.
And therein lies the issue, and that they need to have initial discussions on that if they're going to have any. Hopefully, we can have some talks going in the springtime, but as long as missiles are being shot off, it's going to create that climate of hysteria and concerns, and any attempt to get the two sides together in the near future is going to be problematic if that continues. But we should be paying some attention and showing some effort toward diplomacy for a change.
Michael, last question, maybe last two. Are you optimistic on this resolving itself without it turning into something more kinetic? I guess that's the first question. And for the last, let's just go with that one. Are you optimistic of this unraveling in a way that doesn't turn out to be bringing the world into this kind of conflict?
I'm pessimistic right now that if we continue this course, we're going to enter into an area of escalating and cascading conflicts that will come together as a crescendo. And I was on RT the other day with George Galloway, and we both came to the same conclusion. Galloway, of course, is a former British MP. Mm-hmm. And we both agreed that given this climate, unless the United States backs off a little bit in some of these areas, there will be this problem, because these countries are rebelling. These other countries are rebelling against U.S. dominance, and what we're seeing is basically the last effort by the neocons within the United States to push that, contain Russia and contain China, and the world is that part of the world is just not going to put up with it any longer. because of that dominance and control and the sanctions that have been used, how we have weaponized the economies against them. We have hurt ourselves in the process of doing that. And how you reconcile that is only going to be cured over time when we change our ways of diplomacy.
One more question, last question. Does the U.S. pushing so hard on its allies, its vassal states, to go along with it on this particular course, even when this course adversely affects them at home, meaning their constituencies and the things that people want, meaning many of those countries in Europe are not necessarily on board for this. And because of that...
No, they're not.
So is this the thing that breaks NATO? Or is this the thing that pushes Europe to have its own foreign policy that is separate and distinct from the U.S. foreign policy, or for that matter, of NATO's foreign policy? Is this the thing? Meaning, is the U.S. pushing so hard on this that it basically will divide Europe in a way where NATO becomes somewhat defunct?
Yeah, well, I think it's heading in that direction, and we're beginning to see signs of that. Given the outward expressions by a number of the NATO countries, they're saying don't push so hard. And even the subject of Ukraine itself is saying you're pushing too hard. You're creating not only a military but an economic problem for us. And these other countries are seeing the same thing. And the United States is just sitting back, thinking it can guide all of this and push these countries, and that they will submit. Well, they're gonna turn around and say enough, and that I think that's what we're seeing, and they may look more eastward in the future for economic opportunities if we can quell these immediate crises that are occurring, and I think that they have learned that lesson. That's why you're not having any. That's why with Iran, you're not getting any agreement, because they were in perfect compliance. And the United States just dropped out, and these other European countries saw that, and the signatories to the JCPOA saw that, and then they were sanctioned by their own companies were sanctioned by the United States for even dealing with Iran afterwards, and that sent a very bitter message to those countries. So the cumulative effect of all of this is beginning to rear its head right now, in how they're going to treat the United States in the future, because right now we have hurt ourselves as a result, and how you overcome that is going to take not only a lot of time, but what I'm seeing right now is that we are actually digging in, and we're just hurting ourselves in the process.
Yeah, we're hurting our credibility, not to mention isolating ourselves with people we consider our allies around the world, not to mention pushing Russia and China closer together in this conflict.
Correct.
Mike, thank you very much, man. I always appreciate your analysis on this stuff. The voice that you guys were listening to is Michael Maloof. He's a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, author, and a regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal service in the U.S. Department of Defense. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. We're going to be taking your calls. The number is 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Austin Pelly, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. And we are accepting your phone calls. Starting up, the number is 202-521-1320. And we have Tarif from New Orleans. What's going on, Tarif? How you doing this morning?
I'm doing fine. I got I want to summarize something that I've been looking at yesterday and today. First, I'd like to say, free Julian Assange, free Dumlinger, hashtag no more. As the world wakes up, like Malou says, met you, Eric, and a host of other people that's recognizing the world is waking up. Eurasia and China is moving forward. The West is freaking out. George Soros came out with a video yesterday just basically going at it against Xi for standing up against his neoliberal policies. And China also moved past 27 countries in Europe GDP, which is the 27 countries GDP is 27 trillion. China's is now 18 trillion. And they're growing with leaps and bounds. And also the West don't like that. And they're pushing China and Russia, which I think one day they're gonna try to close down Sputnik Radio, which I feel to believe that I think y'all should still go and post y'all stuff on the internet, where we can still call in, even though y'all might not have the radio signal anymore in the future. That will still help us out, And also, I will also.
We're not going anywhere, Tariq. Don't worry.
Mr. I hope so. I hope y'all stay there. But I hope but I want to put some optimism in that. Jamal, you're right.
Tariq, I'm chained to this microphone. They would have to drag Austin and I out, fingers bloody as we hold on, fighting our way to remain on radio. And we'd be doing the show as they do it, by the way. It's like they're trying to take us out. They're trying to take us out.
They're going to try to. Y'all, RT, and a whole bunch of other people. Like they're doing it with Joe Rogan. They're trying. But Joe Rogan, all you got to do is just leave and create his own thing. But anyway, let me finish. Mm-hmm. The thing is this. Space is the ultimate employer. Pelly, Austin, and, Jamal, check this out. Once the space programs get fully up and running in Russia and China like they're doing, because it seems like the U.S. ain't put so much into the space program and nuclear power engines like Russia and China doing, right, and other type of technologies. A child that's born 30, 40 years from now, 50 years from now, would not have to worry about getting a job because the job was already going to beat out. Matter of fact, I'm going to give you an instance. When I was living in Houston, I applied for a job at Walmart, warehouse distribution. For every job they had in that warehouse, they had 700 people applying for that one job. When space opened up, we have space exploration going to the moon, Venus to mine for H3 helium, and going to like the moons of not Saturn, Jupiter, right? And mining the areas, mining these big old rocks, the astral belt. That's going to be jobs for mining, logistics, welding, machinery, medical, law enforcement, on and on. It's going to be reversed. It's going to have 700 jobs to one person instead of one job to 700 people.
Tarif, I would have to disagree because maybe eventually, centuries down the line, but for the foreseeable future, space is only for the elite. If you have the money and if you have the education. So I think the biggest squeeze that we've seen in the economy with is the middle class, the lower class and the middle class, because jobs are becoming more and more education necessary. And so we have way fewer just straight up manual labor positions because that's what robots are for. So, and for probably the entirety of 2000 up to 2100 and beyond, I would say, space is still going to be for the elite because the amount of money it takes to send someone up there and the amount of, I guess, danger that just danger. And every day, if you have one workplace accident, you're gone, you're dead, you're unalive. That's the one workplace accident. So it's going to be a very elite and upper class position. Maybe eventually when you get into the whole expanse and you actually have like legitimate colonies on the asteroid belt and on Mars, then maybe I could start to see what you're saying.
I disagree. So the scientists, Jamal might know this because I know he followed it a lot. Austin, check this out. Yes, it costs a lot of money for a startup process to make a new rocket engine, right? And these new systems. But by me being on the internet constantly and finding out that they come up with cheaper solutions to make these things, like who would have thought at one time we used to mill out an engine using a CNC machine, but they have these new machines where it's almost like a 3D printed to
right.
Titanium and iron.
You mean the rocket? Yeah. One of the companies are starting to basically 3D fabricate rocket parts. I don't know if they've gotten to the point yet where they can build it completely. You may know this more than I do. I've seen the company and I've seen the work that they were doing for it to try to basically bring down the cost of creating rockets. I've even seen some of the technology they were trying to do with this kind of like gravitrons, where the thing would spin and then like launch the thing into orbit to try to cut down on costs of payloads and stuff like that. But please continue, Tarif.
But but it is because by them briefly printing it, it's taking out the time of making it because they're making it quicker, and it's becoming stronger too. The materials is becoming stronger, and you have new technologies come out. Just like we got these tubes, carbon tubes that's stronger than that they was discovered in Japan like 30 years ago that they're still trying to make. And they got these leaps and bounds with China's making with the Mark 30 tunnels that one day that you might not have to use rocket engine mode. You use these very fast planes to escape the gravity. All this in due time will drive down the price of going to space. It will not be for elites. That's mainly for Hollywood to put it in your mind, to put it in our mind that, no, it's only for billionaires like Bronson and Elon Musk and the rest of these people, Jeff Bezos. No, I feel to believe, because you always got somebody that's being born every day that's genius, that's going to come up with a solution. They're going to make things cheaper. They're going to make it like more palatable for people to go into space and to work and make life more easier for us. Who would have knew that, we'd be flying 100 years ago? You know what I'm saying? Who would have knew?
No, I feel you, Tarif.
No, you don't know what, yeah.
I think I err on the side of Austin on this, only because not so much that you can't get the price down. I agree with you on that. I agree that the price is going to come down, as they miniaturize equipment, as they become more a space-faring civilization, as you have bases on the moon, on Mars, around the... Agreed on that point. I think the part that I disagree with is the robot part. I think all things being equal, as the technological proficiency increases, you're going to find companies have every fiscal incentive in the world to use a robot as opposed to a person. It's no different than now. So if you go into, for example, you go into 7-Eleven, what we've seen over the course of time period is not the work that humanity does increase. We've seen it decrease, if that makes sense, with technology taking up a lot of that space. So if you can walk into 7-Eleven, for example, well, there's systems out there now where you walk in, it bings your card when you pick up stuff and you walk out. You don't even need a cashier. If you go to grocery stores now, you have all of these checkout counters where they can get rid of and deprioritize hiring cashiers. Even when I used to be a software engineer, I built systems that would do the job of 2 and 3 people that were in the office and do it better than those 2 or 3 people because I can go through the database and pull that information up and everything else. And so when you get to space, I would imagine that the systems they're going to build are going to build with an eye towards how do we automate this process? Because if you need to put a person in that, you're going to have to pay for insurance. You're going to have to pay for potential injury. All of that stuff isn't just going to come along right along with it. But yeah, I guess I agree with both of you on this. I think it's a little bit of both. But Tarif, thank you. New Orleans. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. We'll be back in a moment.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, fixated between the ever-expanding rift on our collective ideology. I'm your political analyst fighting for the right, Austin Pelly.
And in the left corner, fisticuffs for the left, I'm your indefatigable, your ever-vigilant, your last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
That means that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. Had a good show so far, entering the last 60 minutes here. Starting off with COVID news and our headlines. Yesterday in the United States, there were 456,871 new COVID cases reported, along with 2,558 deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 469,931 cases per day, a decrease of 42% from the average 2 weeks ago. 64% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 75% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 74,989,453 people across the United States and killed 885,938 people. In national news, strict precautions to keep President Joe Biden protected from the coronavirus could threaten to undercut his administration's efforts to tell Americans, especially those vaccinated and boosted like the president, that they can go on with something closer to normal in the face of Omicron. When Biden met with U.S. governors at the White House on Monday, he was the only one given a glass of water, lest anyone else remove their mask to take a drink. The president was seated more than 10 feet from everyone, including Vice President Kamala Harris and members of his cabinet. A White House staffer who was wearing a surgical mask when Biden entered the room was quickly handed an N95 version. These are just some of the extraordinary efforts on the part of the White House to keep the president from getting COVID-19, an effort that started before the now 79-year-old was even elected by focusing on remote events from a studio in the basement of his Delaware home. I just love the fact that the Secret Service now is just containment protocols. The Secret Service is now CDC on containment protocols.
Oh, make sure Biden stays
Instead
safe.
of carrying like M16s, they've got N95s. Yeah. Moment's notice.
It's like throwing at the person. It's like, don't let him get near the president.
All their ammunitions are just vaccine darts.
I mean, look, man, you got an old president. You got to protect him. They're not worried about the guy.
Raring for another term, too.
Right.
On to literally anything else.
Protect the president.
Kicking off Black History Month, at least half a dozen historically black colleges and universities fielded bomb threats yesterday across 5 states and, of course, D.C. After issuing a shelter-in-place and a sweep of the campuses, no explosive devices were found at any school. The threats came yesterday, the day before Black History Month, and are riding on the backs of a series of threats to the same and other black campuses on January 4th. The college's FBI and ATF will continue to investigate and monitor the situation. UCLA, for example, has switched to remote learning in response to these threats out of a, quote, abundance of caution, end quote. U.S. regulators are urging drug maker Pfizer to apply for emergency authorization for a 2-dose regimen of its COVID-19 vaccine for children 6 months to 5 years old, while awaiting data on a 3-dose course, aiming to clear the way for the shots as soon as late February. A person familiar with the matter told the Associated Press. Now, the Food and Drug Administration is pushing the company to submit its application based on the 2-dose data for potential approval in February, and then to return for additional authorization once it has the data from the 3rd dose study, which is expected in March. The 2-step authorization process could mean that young children could be vaccinated more than a month earlier than previous estimates, assuming the FDA and CDC greenlights the shots. U.S. federal prison system is on lockdown after a gang altercation took place early Monday. 2 inmates were killed during the fight and another 2 were injured at a penitentiary in Texas. The incident happened around 11:30 a.m. yesterday at USP Beaumont. The altercation involved members of the MS-13 street gang. U.S. District Judge Lisa G. Wood on Monday rejected the plea deal reached by prosecutors and Travis McMichael on hate crime charges, a plan that would have precluded his federal trial in the killing of Ahmaud Arbery. Earlier, McMichael had agreed to plead guilty to a single hate crime charge, interference with rights, in exchange for prosecutors recommending he serve 30 years in a federal prison. Wood said she was not comfortable with the sentencing guidelines of the agreement. The judge has been expected to rule separately on the same plea deal for McMichael's father, Gregory McMichael, but after the judge's rejection of the son's plea deal, attorneys for both McMichaels asked for more time to decide whether to change their pleas to guilty. The next hearing will be Friday. In international news, the United States and Russia bitterly attacked each other over the Ukraine crisis in a diplomatic brawl Monday at the UN Security Council, in a session replete with acidic exchanges that could have been lifted from the Cold War era. The Americans, backed by their Western allies, accused Russia of endangering peace and destabilizing global security by massing more than 100,000 troops on Ukraine's border, while Kremlin diplomats dismissed what they called baseless and hysterical U.S. fear-mongering aimed at weakening Russia and provoking armed conflict. They also accused us of imposing a Nazi regime in Ukraine. The meetings of the 15-nation Security Council requested by the United States last week have not been expected to produce any diplomatic breakthroughs. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson apologized and vowed to fix it after a report on Monday into lockdown parties held at his Downing Street residence criticized Syria's failures at the heart of government. A limited report by senior civil servant Sue Gray on Monday found that the alcohol-fueled events had taken place at Downing Street when lockdown rules were in force. Gray said there had been serious failures of leadership and that some of the events should not have been permitted. After initially saying that no rules were broken, Johnson has repeatedly declined to enter specifics about his own attendance at some of the gatherings. Opinion polls showed British voters felt Johnson should resign, 69% in one poll and 63% in another. In Earth and Science news, the longest lightning bolt has been recorded on Monday in the U.S., spanning 477 miles over 3 states. Experts say lightning does not normally span more than 10 miles for a single flash. Also in 2020, a single flash in Argentina hit the longest time a lightning bolt struck, hitting 17.1 seconds. And in holiday news, today is Chinese New Year, National Get Up Day. Oh no, this next one. National Work Naked Day.
Nice.
Jeffrey Toobin. Yeah, when you pair it with National Get Up Day.
Yeah.
Because, over a Zoom camera, I understand not having pants on.
Yeah.
But if it's National Work Naked Day and you're on a Zoom camera,
right,
and then you stand up because it's National Get Up Day.
You're not supposed to stand up.
No.
It's like women hold their legs when they're sitting down. You just have to be aware.
Okay.
Just saying, right?
All right, those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly.
Yeah, it puts me in the mind of Toobin. Because, look, I felt bad for Toobin, even though it's so funny. Because it's like one of the things that COVID has basically changed is the way that we organize our lives. And some of that has to do with work. And so, you would have a person, they're having a Zoom call, and then somebody walks up behind them, a guy that is not the husband of that particular woman that's there. Or you have Toobin, who's like, all right, guys, I'll see you guys later. And then for whatever particular reason, 2 seconds later, he's on himself, like he's in an amusement park. And so there's that part. It just takes a little bit getting used to. But yeah, Get Naked Day and
Work Naked Day.
Work Naked Day. Nice. If you're working from home, go have at it.
Oh, not in the office?
Yeah. Well, yeah, not in the office. Not in the office. You guys couldn't see it,
Today
but also
is
start
National
taking his
Work
clothes
Naked
off.
Day, and tomorrow is National Regret to Have Been Fired Day.
Right. It's like, oh, I thought I was supposed to work naked today. So which one of these stories piques your interest? The Joe Biden one is funny to me, only because it's like, we're going to get back to some level of normality. And you have the Secret Service tackling a guy because the guy not wearing a mask.
Administration specifically saying that? I know that experts and scientists have pretty much agreed that the pandemic isn't going anywhere. It's endemic at this point. We should start. And actually, opinion polls, this came out yesterday. I actually have this brought up. 70% of Americans say it's time to accept COVID and get on with our lives.
Agreed.
Well, when you break it down by demographics of voters, Republicans, 89% of them say it's time to move on.
Of course.
71% of independents. But only 47% of Democrats.
Really?
Which means they're not even in the majority. They're still saying, hey, we need to be socially distant. We still need masks. We still all need vaccines. We need to remote learn and things like that.
I'm okay with this notion of, we need to live with it, because I think I've been there for several months at this point. I'm sick of the COVID thing. And after a while, it's like, it's only so long you can live in this kind of state of panic or hysteria that everything is going on. By the same token, I don't necessarily think that means that you can't wear a mask, or you can, at the very least, try to distance, or for that matter, get the vaccine. I think those things can live gently or comfortably together with one another. But I do think from a mindset standpoint, yes, it's like, it's driving us crazy. I mean, you're having people with all of these kind of emotional issues that have taken place as a result of it, not necessarily being able to deal with it, people who are being sheltered in their homes. And even this issue of work and the way that things have reorganized themselves, it's pressure.
Can we finally agree, Democrats, that it's time to revive the economy? It's time to get back to normalcy. Can we finally get there?
They don't agree with you, apparently, Austin. I think that's amazing, though. I mean, it's been 2 years, right? Maybe 2.5 years.
It's been 4 years of COVID because of COVID-19, and we're in 2022. We're in the fourth year. It's been stateside pretty alive and relevant for 2 years.
What do they want? I mean, meaning, I understand this notion of the American public majority saying, I am sick of this. I'm trying to get back to some level of normality. I'm trying to live my life. I get that COVID is bad. I get that it's potential. I get that it's still floating around. By the same token, I'm going to try to recoup some level of normality, even if it's a new normal. I get that point. I don't understand what Democrats want in this. I don't get it. I mean, in fact,
they want to bankrupt the economy.
Is that what it? I don't believe it.
They want to
bankrupt the economy.
Throw the country down the toilet.
I just think they got it monstrously wrong. Like, if you think of Biden, apparently there's beef taking place between Biden and his Health and Human Services director. I believe the guy's name is Becerra. And apparently Biden doesn't like the fact that COVID has gone gangbusters. He doesn't like the fact that the administration is basically being blamed for it. He doesn't like the fact that they've overly focused basically on vaccinations. And so it's like you have this kind of weird mix where what Biden has done hasn't worked. And Biden was supposed to be the adult in the room. After a while, Trump was the person who got 400,000 people killed. Trump was the person who didn't do due diligence in prioritizing health as opposed to the economy. Biden coming in office was supposed to be the guy. He was the adult. He was going to be the guy that shows us how it's done. And when he gets in, he overly focuses on the vaccination at the expense of everything else, which didn't work. And so it's like, I don't know what else they want out of this. I don't know what that means in the sense of, no, I just want to get on with my life. I don't know what Democrats mean in the sense of, no, I don't think I just want to get on with my life. We just need to fight COVID harder. I don't know what that means.
Yeah. So I want to get into a couple things. One thing that didn't make it into our headlines that we talked a little bit about yesterday, Trudeau has tested positive for COVID.
Right.
Ironically, the day after the convoy, the Freedom Convoy arrives in Ottawa and basically shuts down the parliament. They park in front of it and they shut down half of Ottawa.
You think he got infected on purpose to avoid the political?
I don't know if he even got infected. I mean, he put out a tweet that said, oh, my son got infected, therefore I got infected, and I need to now. He's like, now I need to spend 2 weeks at home.
Yeah.
I'll be doing my job and position of parliament
coincidentally
remotely.
Away from this protest.
Coincidentally away, and he doesn't have to deal with the fact. The whole point of this protest, right, is to massively inconvenience the government.
Yes.
So they're forced to reckon with their demands.
Right. Every day, Justin Trudeau get out of office, get out of bed. He sees him standing out there.
If he's in another location, he could be in Vancouver and just say he could be in California, in Mexico. He could be in Fiji with a nice little Corona and lime in his hand, and he could say, "Well, I'm not inconvenienced."
Yeah.
And 2 weeks. I know that we were talking yesterday about this convoy, and it's expected for them to be out for a couple weeks.
Yeah.
But 2 weeks in harsh cold. And the amount of money for gas and for lodging and food and all that, I know people are supporting them now.
It's expensive.
I think the support's gonna go down because you're gridlocking the city over 2 weeks. 2 weeks might be long enough to wait them out.
Oh, you're talking about for Trudeau? Yeah, maybe. I mean, that's why you think oh man, I don't want to take that step of thinking that he's faking COVID. I mean, it's possible, I suppose. It is coincidental that at the exact same time that the protest is landing, I got COVID, so I am.
He said it
going to be in the
3
office.
hours after the convoy arrived.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like, I'm not going to be here, so I appreciate you guys doing this. I mean, and from the same, protests always have a headwind against it because for a while, people are going to get tired of protesting. Like it's always, right? There's a certain amount of energy. Even the Yellow Vest movement, Macron's take on that was, okay, we need to sap the strength and wait them out. And so it went for like a year or something to that effect. And Macron was like, okay, we're going to give you a little bit so the public can come down in their support of you. And we're going to point out to the fact that this guy, they're inhibiting the ability of the public to do whatever they're going to do. So there's their part. So you could be right. I mean, especially in the weather, the expense, the costs, all of that stuff. I don't necessarily know if Trudeau faked it, though. I guess we don't necessarily know that one way or the other. But it is massively coincidental that, 3 hours after a convoy arrives to occupy the town, that Trudeau is like, I got COVID, so I'm going to, go elsewhere while you guys occupy this.
I'm not saying he did do it on purpose. I'm not saying he's faking it, but it looks a little puzzling.
Yeah.
So, we will see who wins out in that pushback if they're going to wait it out.
I get the feeling it's going to be Trudeau. The majority of the public seems to be on board for the vaccinations. The majority of the public seems to point the finger at the unvaccinated as being responsible for it. I'm just looking at polls in Canada. So even though you have a majority or a large number of people, a significant amount of people who don't like that stuff and who show up to protest, well, if the majority of the public is already on Trudeau's side on that, and you have these guys occupying the city, basically bringing this stuff to a crawl, where is the public going to mostly fall? I suspect the public is going to mostly fall on the side of Trudeau and say that these guys are creating too much problems or too much commotion in the city itself. But we'll see. I mean, who knows? I mean, you may have a public upswell of support for these guys that may not necessarily be the majority, but in that particular city, you may have large numbers.
Yeah, there's a lot I still want to get to, but one more thing on this is they've stalled out Ottawa. So while Trudeau himself could leave Ottawa and still do his job remotely, everybody else, if you're living there, if you can't get to work for 2 weeks, are you getting a paycheck for 2 weeks? If you're a business, yeah, you're going to. And do you take it out on the truckers or do you take it out on Trudeau?
I think you take it out on the truckers.
And I'm not entirely akin to Canadian politics. Does it work like the U.S. where you have a mayor of cities?
Oh, yes.
And because Trudeau's not the mayor of Ottawa.
No.
So then does that person get a lot of backlash? Because I don't think this is going to stall Canada.
Yeah.
This is going to stall Ottawa.
Ottawa, correct.
So while Trudeau might be able to survive this, what are the other political implications for other people?
Honestly, I don't think this is a threat against Trudeau at all. I think Trudeau will be fine in this. I think the catch is going to become on the truckers. I think the pressure is going to escalate more and more on the truckers as they become more of a pain for the people who are basically trying to live in Ottawa. And again, it's one thing if the overwhelming majority of the public backed them. If they had like the Yellow Vest started with like 80% approval of the French public, meaning the entirety of France, like 80% backed them, that's not where these guys are starting. And so it's like, if you're not starting there, then at that point it's just diminishing returns. I mean, I get they're going to make their protests, but is that protest really threatening to Trudeau? I would say no. Is it threatening to the government of that particular city? Even with that, I say no. I guess it depends on who the public blames. And if the public is erring on the side of blaming the truckers, then not only are they going to blame the truckers for basically occupying the time and everything else, they're also just going to disagree with their basic premise. But we'll see. I mean, it's one thing if the truckers said, we individually don't want to get vaccinated. That's one argument. But their concerns escalated. I mean, it's like anytime you see a protest, and you're going to find this to be infinitely true, whatever their starting concerns, those concerns escalate. And that happened with the Yellow Vest movement. It happened with BLM. And of course, that happened with the truckers. But we'll see. I mean, that's one of those things we can keep an eye on to see how long they actually can keep that up. And not just keep that up, whether or not the government responds. Meaning, how long is the government going to be okay with these guys occupying Ottawa in this particular fashion? And is it going to be something where the government basically pushes and says, okay, protests over with.
We shall see. I mean, if Trudeau has COVID, he can still meet with them via Zoom too, the Truckers Association, and people to hear their demands. But we got more stories I want to get to.
Long as he keeps his pants on.
Yeah. It doesn't stand up. I want to start with a question. Racial quotas. We talked about the Supreme Court and affirmative action and these cases that are coming up right now. Racial quotas have been deemed unconstitutional. Is one person, I need one black person, is that a racial quota?
Yeah, by definition.
Okay. So isn't Biden doing an unconstitutional act by saying this has to be a woman and this has to be a black person for the Supreme Court nomination? And I'm not saying, is it moral? Is it tokenism? Yeah. I'm going a step further.
Right.
Isn't it unconstitutional for him to say, I have this quota?
No. I don't think it's, no.
The Supreme Court has deemed it unconstitutional, and you were behind that. You were saying that there shouldn't be racial quotas, and affirmative action is something different. Okay, we've had that conversation.
Right. Well, you know, Biden is not the first president who basically said, I'm going to choose a woman, or I'm going to choose a black person, or I'm going to choose something for a position. So it's not like this is the first time that a president has done this. And from the standpoint of quota, I would imagine that if you asked him, he would say, well, look, there are a myriad of qualified people for this position. I'm just erring on the side of race as being one of the items that is going to be in the mix. And so that's why we probably say it. Is it tokenism? Yes. Is it a quota? Quota is a little...
Well, no. You can't renege on this. Because you just said, if I said that I need one black person for this team, yes, that's a quota. Even one is a quota. This is exactly that definition. So you can't have it both ways.
Court, I mean, the Supreme Court is different. I mean, because it's not.
Why is it different?
Because it's not really a team. It's like you have X number of members on the bench. The president gets the right to choose who they want for that particular position. It's not like you have a job and you say, okay, I need 3 black people for this job. I need 10 white people. It's not that. Biden just said, I'm going to choose a particular person for this particular position. I didn't take it as him saying it as a quota. I don't know if the quota thing applies to this.
So it's unconstitutional when colleges do it.
Yes.
But when it's the highest level of our justice system,
right?
Unconstitutional is fine.
But is it a quota? I mean, like.
Well, you just said it was.
Did I say the Supreme Court was a quota?
No.
Or did I say choosing one person for a position of particular color is a quota?
Yes.
Right.
You did that part.
Right. If you asked me if it was the Supreme Court, I would probably say, I don't know if that's a quota.
I'm not trying to misquote your misquota, but I know I'm coming out hot today.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I see that as a quota for the Supreme Court. If it's a token, yes. Is it an affirmative action pick? Biden is making it that one, unfortunately. I mean, is there any difference between him just saying, yeah, I guess the issue is him. It's his rhetoric. Because if Biden would have just chose a black person for it, or an Asian person for it, or a Hispanic person for it, then the race is secondary to the fact of the reason why he's choosing them. In this case, it seems race is primary choice, if that makes sense.
Okay. Well, I wanted to hit one more.
Yeah.
We're going to have to disagree on that.
I don't know about the quota thing. I
think it's unconstitutional. He should be in prison. Okay.
How's it?
No, we're
not
getting
the prison part. But the unconstitutionality of it is the part that I don't think
because
applies.
The Supreme Court has said that it's unconstitutional to have racial quotas, and I see this as a quota. If you don't,
everything.
If you don't see this as a quota, then it's not unconstitutional.
Yeah.
I would see it as a quota. I would say it's unconstitutional.
Yeah, I don't know if I can see the Supreme Court thing as a quota, but fair enough.
I want to go to Arbery.
Biden needs to be arrested and put in prison for breaking quota law.
I think at the very least we should investigate him for sexual assault allegations first. But anyway, so the 2 stories here that had jumped out. U.S. federal prisons in lockdown. Ahmaud Arbery, the judge throws out the plea deal.
Right, 30 years wasn't enough.
Brings in a very important question. Should we have judges that can just say, nope, I don't agree with both sides coming to an agreement, and for the sake of what I think is right, I'm changing this, throwing it out. I won't accept it.
Job is justice.
That's a different question. Sure. But what I'm curious about is the prison system much better now? Because if the U.S. federal prison system, the entire system, is on lockdown from one fight, 2 people died, I get that. That seems like the federal prison system is doing better than some horror reports we've heard of in the past.
Oh, you mean those gang fights and stuff like that?
And with the rejection of this plea deal, the Arbery family they wanted the rejection of the plea deal.
Yes.
They didn't like the plea deal. And I believe it was Ahmaud's mother
It was.
who came out and said, we don't want any plea deal that puts them in a federal prison because we want them in a state prison because the conditions are worse.
Really? She said that?
So
I appreciate that.
What do you mean you appreciate that?
I would probably feel the same.
How can we condone?
Don't misunderstand
I
me.
get that she's hurting.
Yeah, that's my point. Don't misunderstand me. I don't want the conditions in our prison systems to be appalling. They just kind of are, regardless of whether I want it or not. But if it was my kid and a bunch of good old boys murdered my child, and on top of murdering my child, took a Snapchat as he bled out, I mean, yeah, I'd have some serious feelings about that. And yeah, I would want them to suffer every day of their life.
So what is the justice system for in this country? Is it for correction, reintegration to society, or punishment?
All 3. Well, the first 2. I'm sorry. Punishment and what was the other one? It's not for reintegration. We don't deal with that part. Yeah, correction and it was something else. Because we don't deal with the getting people prepared to go back into life in the real world. We don't do that. I mean, the policy, the program.
Right. No. I'm not saying like what is the effective result of our justice system.
No, the purpose.
Yeah. What is the purpose?
I just don't think getting people prepared to go back into the country or to the society is part of the purpose for it. I think it's either punishment or quote unquote justice. I think it's one of those. It's one part of it's punitive, one part is kind of justice. Another part of it is, they would say, protecting the public. Meaning we want to put this person in a cage so this person can't necessarily adversely affect the public in the way that they basically affected the public when they killed, robbed, stole, et cetera, et cetera. I would say it's those 3.
But what should it be?
Because
I would think
rehabilitation should be a part of it.
I would err on the side of, yes, rehabilitation, sure, but I would probably err on the side of punishment a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I would assume, and I'm making a generalization, open to hearing the other side, that the left would be more rehab. Yeah, rehab.
Yeah. I would want it to be, if it was left up to me, it would be a combination between punishment, rehabilitation, and getting the person prepared to come back into the real world, not to mention keeping the public
how
safe.
can we have it both ways of saying that at a federal level, prisons are better?
Mm-hmm.
But as a punishment, we want to reject your plea deal of saying that you are guilty because we think you should be abused in prison more for this act.
But the judge didn't say that.
No, the family did.
Right. The judge just doesn't believe that 30 years is enough. But there are all sorts of people who get convicted for like 100 years, 150 years, 300 years in prison, depending on how heinous the crime was. So it's not like the judge is saying something that is off the table, meaning I get what the parents are saying. The parents is like, this is not enough. You kill my kid. That's not enough. I want you guys to torture and
But
suffer.
is it right to have a caveat of your punishment being, I'm going to send you somewhere that has notoriously worse conditions? But not saying that I'm not saying the difference between like levels of security in prison, because that's dependent on the crime. Not dependent on the crime. The punishment. You're going to be more abused in a state prison.
Yeah.
That's what
But
just
the judge
came out.
didn't say that. The parents said that.
Yes. I'm not talking about the judge here.
Okay.
So why I'm saying it's not right to ask for a difference of sentencing and using which prison and the notorious nature of abuse in the prison as a punishment.
Why not? It's the parent. The parent can ask for whatever they want. And it's their kid.
Because that's literally saying that the prison system in America is corrupt.
It is. It's horrible.
So, but it's condoning it. It's saying that we need to use
the parent. I mean, okay. Let's disambiguate the difference between, let's say, the judge and the legal process and what the parents want. If it was my kid, I would want those people to suffer horrendously for the rest of their life. And when they drop dead, to end up in hell where they would suffer for an eternity. That's where I am. And so I have no issue with the parents saying, yeah, I want them to suffer worse. I want them to be in a situation, the worst case scenario that they can be in. That's what I want. That's just a person, right? There are going to be some people who, I turn the other cheek and everything else. I don't understand those people in this particular situation. Then you have the judge who has to deal with the letter of the law that can't necessarily take into account how the parents or the penchant for suffering that the parents want to impart. Meaning the judge can take into consideration what the parent says and wants, but at the end of the day, the judge is just looking for an honest, fair, justice, legal process.
You think?
Yeah. All things being equal, I mean...
I think that the judge in this case is having a difference of fair versus legal. And I think that we leave that loophole up in the justice system. It's basically saying that we condone all the ethics and morality of our judges. And she's saying, I believe the judge was female. Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, she's saying that justice isn't served if they only do 30 years.
Right.
Justice isn't served if they agree to, if I accept this agreement.
Right.
So that's her personal take.
That's
should
always a personal
judge
take.
be able to have a personal take? I mean, we've got 12 people in there for a reason.
It's always a personal take. I mean, like, for a judge to say, okay, I want to put this person in prison for 30 years. I want this person for 20 years. Well, which one is right? Like, there is no such thing as justice. Let's be very clear. That stuff is always a moving target. So it's not like, okay, as a word of God, this is what justice means in this particular situation. That doesn't exist. And so the only thing you basically get are these things of trying to get close to a certain situation of what you consider to be just. From the judge's standpoint, she doesn't consider the 30
getting a
years
lot of
just.
calls. People would like to comment on this. So I'm going to
go for it.
At least I would like them to comment on the same topic. So I'm going to throw it to Tammy calling in from Maryland.
Oh, we only have 2 minutes. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, but we can get her in. Tammy, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Yes, good morning. You know what, for being a parent, it's the way we raise our children. And I understand she would like for them to be in 30 in the worst prison. If you really look at the federal prison today, these people are being lost all over, and that's our taxpayers' money. But however, we got to go back and redo this, because I had a cousin used to be in correctional back in the 70s and 80s. It was horrible back then.
Yeah. I mean, our prison system is appalling. I mean, to put it mildly.
It is.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I'll let you finish.
However, he told me this out his own mouth. I said, oh, I want to be a prisoner guard. He said, no, you don't. If they didn't do anything to clean it up back then, and we're back in 2022?
Yep.
That's taxpayers' money wasted. I feel sorry for those two guys, who killed her son. I understand that. Hate does not need to go in hate. Like, I forgot who written the ruin of a nation starts at a home.
I mean, I get that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I do get that. By the same token, people regard this stuff differently. You're going to have some people who say, I turn the other cheek and I'm praying for you and I forgive you. And you have other people, and I suspect probably more like me, who would like that person to suffer for the rest of their life if you're going to take my kid. How can you say she's wrong for that?
If you in there they are suffering. Truly or not, they are suffering.
I know, but the amount of suffering that a person is encountering and whether that's quote-unquote justice is going to be dependent upon the person who's looking at it. It's not absolute. That's my point.
Right. One thing about it we fail to realize, we only on this earth, but not for so long. And God has the one who makes that ultimate decision.
Well, if God would have made that ultimate decision, Arbery would still be here. I mean, look, we can blame God for Arbery getting killed if you want to do that. I don't know that. What I do know, as a flat fact, is that those guys were responsible for murdering Arbery. What I do know, as a flat fact, was that the people who were in that truck decided to take pictures while he lay dead on the ground and, didn't necessarily seem to care all that much about the fact they just murdered somebody. And so if that's my kid, if I birthed out of my, womb this child into the world and everything else and all of the associations associated with it about love, affection, you remember all of the things. You remember his first walk, his first step, the first time he ate a meal, the first time he got, stumped his toe. You remember all that stuff. And to your standpoint, or from your standpoint, that child that you raised was basically assaulted, beaten, shot, and then had a picture taken of him as he lay dead. So if I'm the parent, how am I wrong in that? If God is going to get involved, God can get involved at the point in which he dies. Up until the point where those people are still on this earth, then yeah, you're going to have this legal system that gets involved. And I can't necessarily blame the parent for wanting the greatest level of prosecution possible for it. How can I blame the parent for that? It's their kid.
Well, I didn't blame, let me say, I didn't blame the parent. I said, I'm looking at the legal system out there in Georgia. It's terrible.
The legal system is terrible.
We are going a little bit over, Tammy. We do appreciate the call. I do want to make one note. I am not saying that I understand the parents hurting a lot, and I understand it's tragic.
Well, that's what
your son was taken from you.
Yeah.
I guess, as I've said multiple times, I guess I'm a precedent guy. So I was asking a detached question of should we ethically use which penitentiary system, federal or state, should we use that as another form of punishment?
And of course, my answer is no.
Okay.
Yeah, my answer to that is no. That's why I kept breaking it up between what does the parent want versus what is the legal system. From the legal system standpoint, no. The legal system needs to deal with the legalities of it all. From the parent can feel however they want about it. They can forgive, or for that matter, they can want torture. But you guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. Hey, thank you for the call. Good back and forth. Tammy, thank you. Always call back. Feel free to call back. Well, but you guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are talking
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
You are listening.
We give you the most essential out of the endless information space.
Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, Austin Pelly, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys just so happen to live in the D.C. area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Austin and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. And by the way, just so I'm clear, Tammy, I wasn't necessarily saying you're blaming the parent. It was the thing about this stuff happens at home, and I guess I was just trying to make the point of saying the mom can feel how the mom feels about it. Can't necessarily invoke God in order to kind of assuage those feelings. But besides the point, let's get back into domestic politics. We've had this interesting situation that has been taking place around COVID, and this conversation about basically how are we going to live and deal with COVID as a reality going forward. And for the longest time, it seems like we've just been kind of in this holding pattern of this is going to change one day, and one day this is just going to go away and life is going to start. And we're trying to get to this point, or seemingly to get to the point of saying, well, that's not true. This is not a pandemic. This is now endemic, and we're just going to have to basically live with it. What does that mean for certain states, especially states that were hit hard by COVID, such as New York? New York is still going through difficulties, issues of crime, issues of violence, issues of homelessness, and of course, COVID itself. To have a conversation about what that means for New York, meaning what does it mean going forward treating COVID as endemic as opposed to a pandemic in such a big city. We're joined with Michael Goodwin. Michael Goodwin is a journalist and columnist for New York Post and one of our favorite guests, actually. Michael, how you doing this morning? You doing okay?
So far, so good, yes. Good morning to both of you.
Absolutely. I'm glad to have you. Quick. So from your standpoint, what does that mean? So people are saying, all right, are we at the point where we need to just get over this? We need to just deal with COVID as a thing going forward, as a reality going forward. It's not like a broken bone mending where one day you'll just be able to go running again. You basically just have to accept that your leg is going to hurt in, for ongoing period of time or indefinite period of time. And what does it mean for a state like New York, this kind of massive, big city, especially talking about New York City? What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts, apart from policy differences, is that common sense is always got to be part of the calculation. And common sense, I think, involves the idea that we've been doing this for 2 years now. Many things that we were told were absolute science have changed. And so I think there's a lack of credibility now, a lack of trust among many people toward the government, toward the diktats that say you must do this, you cannot do that, you must wear this, you should not wear that. All of these things have been flexible over time, to put it kindly. And so I think that now we have to look at it in a different way. The Omicron is clearly not as deadly, particularly in part because of the vaccination. New York is heavily vaccinated, perhaps more so than almost any other city, somewhere in the order of 70 to 75%, I believe, fully vaccinated, not necessarily including boosters, but the original vaccine. And of course, there are also those who had coronavirus and recovered. And so they have some natural immunity in addition. So you really have a good percent of the population. And I think the one thing that continues to stick for a lot of people and is something of an indicator of where you are is this question of masks in schools. And I think that the governor extended a mandate. There's still arguments going on between unions and the city university and other groups like that. But I think it's the mask in schools for children who under the age of 5, let's say, or even children who are vaccinated. It seems excessive. Up until recently, and it may even still be continuing in some parts of the city, children were basically eating outside, no matter how cold it was. So there was a kind of a fetish about we're doing everything we possibly can that we can think of to make sure people don't get infected. And I respect and admire that goal. But that's where the common sense comes in. Keeping children outside to eat when it's 40 degrees is not common sense. Making them wear masks all the time, even for speech therapy. Now think of that. Speech therapy for a child is about forming words, how to use the tongue, the mouth, the sounds. Now both the child and the teacher, the therapist, are supposed to wear a mask. Now, it's not possible. It's not possible. And yet that becomes a kind of hard and fast rule. And that one, I think, is in the New Jersey school system. So there are all of these things that defy common sense. And so I think that increasingly there is a lot of meeting of the minds. There is a lot of, now I think, consensus building that we can move on with our lives. I mean, you see it in sporting events. Well, if it's in sporting events with people who are most likely to get sick, why shouldn't it also be true in schools where the children are the least likely to get sick? So it's that kind of thing that I think is now sort of becoming front and center. There's a growing meeting of the minds. It's not 100% by any means. I don't want to overstate it. But I just sense that people are tired of the diktats that have not proven to be true in the end, and so they want to get on with their lives. And so you hear more and more people agreeing with we have to learn to live with it approach.
Just for context sake, I do know someone who does speech therapy with younger children, and their masks have plastic cutouts. So it's clear, so they can mouth words, and so the only real suffering issue is that it's a little muffled. Mm-hmm. But they can still mouth and do all that.
But excuse me, but doesn't that negate the point of a mask if there are cutouts?
No. It's got a plastic shield covering where the mouth is, so it's see-through. Yeah, it's transparent. It's see-through, but it still holds back stuff.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, it's not a lot of people are. Once I saw it, I was like, that is the weirdest looking mask ever.
I can imagine.
But anyway, I want to shift because New York City is incredibly democratic. Mm-hmm. Very left, very blue, very, very true blue. If it's time now, as New York City Mayor Eric Adams says, it's time to stop getting the L. It's time to start winning, take those dubs. Then what does that look like in a very pro-left, in a very blue city? Where does that start? Does it start with taking out the mask mandates? Does it start with taking out the vaccine requirements at restaurants? Like, where does that start in New York? And then another question, does that help Eric Adams after he's been a little bit controversial of we're going to take a really hard stance on crime?
Yeah, look, I think that as far as the mask mandates and that sort of stuff, they have not been, it seems to me anyway, central to what Adams is trying to get across. I think that, and if I'm correct in reading this, I think it's the right approach for him. You mentioned crime, and I think the public only has a certain amount of attention span for politicians these days, and so you've got to have a clear message and a consistent message. And Adams has been all about crime. That has been his main focus in the campaign, and it's been his main focus in the month that he's been in office. So you don't hear him talking a lot about masks. I mean, he wears one in public most of the times himself when he's not giving a speech or whatever. So I think he is sort of paying obligation to that. He has not erased any of the mandates that he inherited from the previous mayor. But there's a kind of chafing going on in the public, and I suspect that he will, more than with crime, he will roll with the punches on the mask mandate. He will follow the crowd, I suspect, more than lead it on that issue.
I mean, I don't have anything issue with the mask mandate. In fact, I agree with it. I mean, even for kids being in school, I would agree with Austin on the, we shouldn't necessarily be vaccinating or at least forcing parents to get their kids vaccinated. and for that matter, whether we should be spending a huge amount of time trying to vaccinate, infants. So there's that, which I agree with. But from the standpoint of the mask or the wearing in school, that just seems like a low investment for more bang for your buck in regards to trying to keep down the issue of COVID. I mean, kids, yes, they have a lower propensity of death, but they can still spread it.
Yeah, but you know how hard it is for teachers to already rein in these kids?
I do get it. I totally get it. I mean, I agree with you.
There's a march today we were just listening about of teachers' unions demanding better pay and things like that. And I was listening to it this morning, too, that I believe teachers are saying that the stress of teaching has gone up like 20-30% or something on average.
Making sure the kids have masks. The teachers are probably concerned about their own health.
And they're also like, teaching it's harder and harder to find teachers now because Great Resignation, and then you've got COVID, and then you've got like the need of the National Guard to come in and help teach.
And not to mention the pay is probably not all that
exactly.
well.
So they're being asked to do more on top of all these. So
for less bang for the buck. So I do get, the difficulty associated with it. If we're going to get parents to send their kids into a school, at the very least, it seems like a low bar to give that parent peace of mind that at the very least their kid may be safe, especially if those parents have certain comorbidities at home with grandparents or with the parent themselves. So that's why I don't necessarily have this big issue with the mask thing, even though I understand where you're coming from, where there seems to be a more meeting of the minds on the issue of people coming together to try to figure out, okay, how do we live with this as opposed to just kind of locking down and everything else. So fair point. That's fair, Michael. Yeah. I want to get into the crime thing that you mentioned, saying Eric Adams was very specific about crime and how you think that's going to serve him well. And I agree with you. I think between that and whatever he does from the standpoint of COVID and trying to reopen New York is going to have huge bang for its buck in regards to his popularity and his success in New York. It's like you're pulling back or you're releasing the tension that's in the country or in the city itself. And you're allowing many of those businesses and people to basically try to get back to some level of normality. And I suspect that New York is going to reward him for that. From the standpoint of crime, how bad is crime in New York where Eric Adams can take such a hard stance on crime and have it get the bang for its buck? Is that just something that's endemic in New York at this point after COVID?
Well, look, I mean, the statistics bear it out that the number of shootings, for example, doubled between 2020 and 2019 and almost doubled again in 2021. So you've had this spurt of violence, which the city is not used to. And I think that part of the upheaval against crime, which is now quite dramatic. I mean, the public is, particularly after the murder of the two police officers and the funeral last week, where the widow of one of the officers was just so powerful in her, not only in her grief, but in her demand that the situation change. And she singled out the Manhattan District Attorney, who was actually in the audience, about saying, to her husband standing near his casket, we hate these laws, including from the new district attorney, because none of us are safe. I hope he hears me.
And this is the one that's called the progressive prosecutor, right? This was the one who wanted less charges on assault crimes and those type of things. Are we talking about the same person?
He's newly elected. His name is Alvin Bragg.
That's it.
Only. And he wants to downgrade a lot of felonies to misdemeanors, which in effect means nothing. For example, he said, and he's apparently backtracked on this, that if you used a gun in an armed robbery, but you didn't actually fire the gun or use it to hurt anybody, then it would not be treated as a felony. Well, that's not what the law says. The law says if the gun is an illegal, if you have it as an illegal weapon, that's a felony. Gun possession, illegal gun possession is a felony. So he has somewhat backtracked on that, it seems. But I think the intent, and in a way, what Alvin Bragg was expressing was a new frontier in decriminalization. The city has already gone a long way, the other district attorneys, his predecessor. And so I think what he did was go beyond the pale, and it was simply too much to bear, and that the city already frightened frightened would now have new reasons to be even more afraid. There would be more violence without consequences. And I think that, so he tripped a wire there, Al did. And I think, so Eric Adams, and this is after Eric Adams is elected. He and Bragg are elected at the same time. As I've noted in the past columns, they share many voters. I mean, Eric Adams' biggest share of the vote came in Manhattan, one of the 5 boroughs, which is where Bragg, and they both got about 80% of the votes in Manhattan. So they share many voters and yet have distinctly opposite views on crime. So it's an unusual situation in that regard. The other thing I would just add quickly is, I mentioned shootings, murders, et cetera, but there's also just a fear on the streets. And this is what you hear when you talk to people. People who are not necessarily victims of crime, but they heard about it with a neighbor. They felt unsafe themselves on, outside their front door. They worry about their children, of course. They won't ride the subway. They're thinking of moving from New York. You hear those stories all the time. Restaurants held up, shoplifting, of course, now becoming the new phenomenon everywhere, sort of a commercial grade shoplifting going on, particularly in drugstores, pharmacies. So the fear is greater than the crime itself. That's what Adams is up against. That's his heavy lift.
Michael, I'm curious of a story that I've been very interested to follow. It seems like de Blasio, on his way out, threw a Hail Mary and opened up a safe injection site in New York City. And then with Adams in here and him taking now this, always this tough on crime stance, and the dichotomy between taking a tough on crime stance by either redefining crime, like Bragg's, as you were saying, or taking a tough on crime stance by punishing way more crimes is very interesting. So I'm wondering how those safe injection sites live. What's their future like under Adams?
That's a very good question. I've actually thought about it myself, and I don't have the answer. I don't think Adams has spoken on this point yet. But you're right in the sense that it sort of cuts both ways. I mean, if you are effectively condoning drug use, in a way, you're also condoning the sale of the drugs, because those who are using the drugs, they need to get it somewhere. It's an illegal narcotic. You go to these sites, they will give you clean needles to shoot up with illegal drugs. They have those pens that help people recover from overdoses, to give them a shot so they can recover from the overdose. So it's an odd mix of helping them to break the law while trying to save their lives. So I think there's a test going on. Does this help? Certainly, if you live on the block or have a business on the block where one of these centers is, you can't wait for it to get out of there, because it's attracting a crowd that's not good for your business and certainly doesn't make you feel safe. I mean, that's always an objection in a densely populated place like New York. The immediate neighbors are suffering from this decision to put it there.
That's a good point. Oh, that's a good question. I got to be honest. All things being equal, I think drugs should be decriminalized in general. And even though I get the argument, right, that I get the argument on that one. That's an interesting question, an interesting dilemma. I'm glad you brought that up, Austin. I mean, I guess I look at it and take it from the standpoint of, I don't want people put in a cage for what may ultimately be a medical issue. And there's certain aspects of society that basically drive people in certain directions towards drugs and everything else that the city tends to absolve itself of blame or responsibility for when that person gets to court after living in conditions over a period of time. I'm squeamish about putting people in a cage for basically drug use, even though I understand from the standpoint of the businesses in the area that it's disadvantageous for them to basically put that particular center there.
Put them in rehab programs. And then after offense, and it's not working, then you can explore jail time.
I like the idea of providing people with the capability of not killing themselves or giving themselves AIDS. Meaning, okay, you guys are addicted. We're accepting the fact that you're addicted. We can't necessarily stop you from being addicted short of putting you in a cage, but at the very least, we don't want you to die. So here are clean needles. Meaning, I get the logic of it, even though I get that's not an imperfect, it's an imperfect logic.
This goes back to my whole thing of, like, I believe in separation of church and state. I don't think that means an amoral government, an amoral society. And this, to me, is an amoral act because it is hurting those people. They are hurting themselves. Does the government have the right to protect their own people, even from themselves? I would say yes.
Yeah, but see, I mean, what hurts worse? That person getting AIDS for an addiction, or that person getting some kind of disease or something from an addiction? Or for that matter, not even having, if they overdose, to be able to provide them with an antidote for the overdose. I mean, that is also protection, even though it's not necessarily protection in the sense of, okay, we're going to stop this person from doing the drug. Again, I don't consider a person doing drugs amoral. I just consider it just is. And so it's like, are there...
No, but it's like, is sadism amoral?
How's it sadism?
Is hurting yourself amoral?
It depends on what you mean by hurt.
Well, I'm saying these drugs hurt. Anyway, we're getting a little
we're in the weeds on that one.
Here.
Yeah, we're in the weeds.
I did want to bring another question to you, Michael. This gerrymandering that's been happening in New York, what is with this bill that's being touted by Democrats, it's being shot down by Democrats, it's being and who's it really helping with this gerrymandering? I'm just very confused at the moment what's coming out of New York.
Yeah, well, there was the state passed a referendum 2013 or 2014 that called for an independent commission to do the redistricting every 10 years. So this is the first time it happened, 2020, the 2020 census. And a little-known wrinkle in the law was that, so there would be 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans appointed to this independent commission. It would be appointed effectively by the legislature, by the parties in the legislature. The wrinkle was that if this commission could not produce a map that had 7 votes, meaning at least 2 of the, in this case, Republicans, plus the 5 Democrats, then it would fall back to the legislature. And even if they did get the 7 votes, the legislature was not forced to accept that map, but they were forced to vote on it. So in the end, it was always about going back to the legislature, which is now heavily Democratic. Both houses have veto-proof majorities. So the Democrats are now fighting among themselves to draw the maps so that to advantage not only incumbents, but to help elect more Democrats, particularly in Congress. I mean, they're doing legislative maps as well, but their focus, of course, is the congressional districts, and that is where most of the contention is. How do you elect as many Democrats as possible? Because it looks as though the Democrats will lose the House of Representatives, so maybe it can be saved if New York can pick up more Democratic seats. Now, the state is also losing 1 seat, so it's going from 27 congressional districts to 26. Republicans have, I believe, 8 of the current 27, and there is talk that the maps that the Democrats are drawing to advantage themselves might end up with Republicans winning as few as 3 of those seats. So it is there's all kinds of fighting. I mean, Carolyn Maloney, for example, an East Side congresswoman in New York City, Manhattan, she almost lost to a primary challenger from Brooklyn who got most of his votes from Brooklyn. So she has been very vocal in saying, I want my district out of Brooklyn. I don't want those voters in my district. They voted against me. And you know what? She's probably going to get that. So that it is, in many cases, it is trying to help the party writ large, but it's also trying to favor the established Democrats
over the other ones. Michael, we're going to have to end it here. It sounds like Democrats are taking a playbook out of Republicans' deck of this with something like that. That stuff should be independent. I agree that it should be independent. But The voice you're listening to, Michael Goodwin. He's a journalist and columnist for the New York Post. You can follow Michael on Twitter at @mgoodwin_New York Post and read his articles on New York Post. This is the final end of the show. Fault Lines with Thomas and Pelly. I want to thank the audience. I want to thank the producer. I want to thank the engineer. And I want to thank all of you for listening to the show and calling in and everything else. You guys have a great, awesome, exceptional, and phenomenal day. Back tomorrow.